Chapter 24. The fire under the dragon merchant's star cauldron was burning. Seeing that the fire was getting weaker, Zhang Yan, who was sitting on the cattail hassock, picked up a few sticks of firewood and placed them under the cauldron. After Princess Linya gave him the 5 elements divine sand, he went to Ai Zhongwen to exchange for a lot of herbs. A few days later, Luo Xiao opened the cauldron to refine medicine. Within 10 days, he had refined no less than 1,000 elixirs and gave them all to him. Luo Xiao sorted out the remaining herbs and threw them into the cauldron. Finally, he jumped into the cauldron and told Zhang Yan to cover the cauldron. Every day, he would use the fire to refine medicine. Every 7 days, he would open the cauldron. Luo Xiao did not dare to try it at first, but this dragon merchant star cauldron was something that could only be found by luck. As long as the method was stable, he could rely on the power of the cauldron to boil the medicine. The medicine would enter the internal organs, wrap up the primordial qi, wash away the impurities, and activate the vitality. According to Luo Xiao's instructions, Zhang Yan first used a small fire to boil the medicine. Every 7 days, he would open the cauldron and change the herbs. Every time, a layer of dead skin would be shed from Luo Xiao's body. At the same time, he had to pour out a whole cauldron of black residue. Every time he refined, Luo Xiao's qi dynamic would become stronger. This was an eye-opener for Zhang Yan. Now, the third 7 days had passed. According to Luo Xiao, he needed to use a fierce fire to attack the cauldron. However, the day of opening the cauldron was right in front of him, but there was no movement in the cauldron. He could not identify the faint qi dynamic either. He did not know if it was because the cauldron was overcooked or it was not fully refined. Without Luo Xiao's instructions, Zhang Yan did not dare to open the cauldron. He only cared about his own cultivation. In this 1 month, he practiced his qi day and night and swallowed a large number of elixirs. These days, the elixirs he ate every day were equivalent to the total amount he had taken in the past. As he concentrated on his training, the Yuanzhen qi in his body became more and more condensed. His qi, which was originally as lively as an ape, was now as tame as a crouching bull and as stable as a black tortoise. It lay peacefully in the orifice of his dan. The state of Yuanqing entering Zhen gradually stabilized. At this moment, he felt that he could already proceed to the next step of the incantation. He picked up the record of Mystic Essence Internal Meditation. Although he had read this book for a long time, he still read it carefully again. Then he stretched out his hand and grabbed the broken jade in his sleeve. His consciousness sank into the doppelganger. As his cultivation increased, the jade seemed to have become somewhat different from before. Originally, the jade was misty, and it was impossible to distinguish up, down, left, and right. It was as if there was nothing else in the world except oneself. When the doppelganger walked in the jade, it was also illusory, swaying unsteadily. But now, he felt as if he was in a vast space, and there was a difference between up and down. Zhang Yan looked up. Above him was an illusory cloud of clear air, but below his feet was thick and turbid as if he was stepping on solid ground. If he looked at it according to the evolution of Hong Meng, at the beginning, the jade could be described as chaos like a chicken, the doppelganger in it. Now, it could be described as clear air rising, turbid air falling, yin and yang divided into 2, heaven and earth beginning to settle. Originally, when his consciousness entered the jade, he could still feel that it was only a fake doppelganger. But at this moment, when his consciousness occupied the jade, all his thoughts and feelings were as clear as real, and he could not distinguish the inside from the outside at all. Zhang Yan seemed to have understood something. It seemed that because his cultivation increased, the situation in the jade changed, and the doppelganger became more and more real. As he pondered, he continued to walk in the broken jade. However, the space here was incomparably vast, and there seemed to be no end to it. He thought to himself, it seemed that the secret of this broken jade was far more than what he saw. But the only thing that mattered was to increase his own cultivation. At this moment, he was not in the mood to study it deeply. The doppelganger sat on the ground, took a posture of 5 hearts facing the sky, and began to silently circulate the mental cultivation method on the wonderful record. According to the incantation, the person who cultivated needed to raise 1 qi dynamic, then split it into 2, 2 into 4, and separately circulate it into the 4 meridians. These 4 qi dynamics all had different methods to circulate, and there could not be the slightest deviation. Although Zhang Yan was mentally prepared, the difficulty at this moment was far beyond his imagination. He tried his best to control it, and barely managed to take the first step. However, when he reached the second step, his mind was careless, and the qi dynamic immediately became chaotic and randomly scattered to various parts of his body. His heart suddenly shook, and his consciousness returned to the main body. When he looked back, he found that the doppelganger had been seriously injured by the qi dynamic and had fallen to the ground. If the main body was cultivating at this moment, it was likely that his foundation would have been injured. He shook his head, took a deep breath, and his consciousness entered the jade again. As his thoughts changed, the doppelganger that had fallen to the ground with serious injuries stood up again. After thinking about it, he felt that he had not mastered the previous part of the qi circulation, so he simply let the doppelganger's body return to the moment before he started cultivating. For the second time, he started from the beginning. This time, he paid special attention to the control of the qi dynamic. However, according to the incantation, he needed to raise another 4 qi dynamics. Not only did he need to circulate the first 4 qi dynamics repeatedly, but he also could not relax for the last 4 qi dynamics. After persisting for almost an hour, he finally could not control it, and the doppelganger that was barely holding on suddenly vomited blood and died. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows slightly and calmed his mind. He threw away all distracting thoughts, and once again let the doppelganger in the jade sit up. Picking up the 8 qi dynamics, he carefully controlled them. However, not long after, his doppelganger fell again and again. However, he did not know that this was only the beginning of the training. The fourth time, the qi dynamics were clearly under his control, but they suddenly and inexplicably went out of control and randomly scattered, causing him to die from a chest pain. The fifth time, when the 2 qi dynamics merged because one was in front of the other, they could not converge at the acupuncture point at the same time, and his chest split open and he died. The sixth time, when he restrained the qi meridians, because the qi dynamics were too turbid, it entangled outside the acupuncture point for a while longer, and his lungs burst and he died. The seventh time, repeated failures, repeated attempts. The more Zhang Yan practiced, the more shocked he became. No wonder Shi Shoujing said that there were many divergent paths in this Taoist book, but the complexity of the qi dynamics traveling in the meridians was far beyond his imagination. The qi of Yuanjun stopped or stayed, passed through or moved, rushed or stopped, sometimes spiraled up, sometimes slowly descended, and almost all of the 365 major acupuncture points in the body were taken care of. The most annoying thing was that you clearly knew how the qi dynamics traveled in the meridians, but you just could not control them, especially towards the end, when you had to control 108 qi dynamics to travel back and forth in the meridians. If there was a slight deviation in the qi dynamics, it would cause all the previous efforts to be wasted, and the doppelganger's death would become more and more unsightly. Schwannmann's techniques mostly focused on the state of mind and not on control, but this Taoist book took the aspect of traveling along the meridians to the extreme, as if it wanted to merge all the methods of qi circulation into one. Just by practicing the first part of the incantation, he had tried all kinds of ways to die with broken meridians, reversed flow of zhenqi, and backlash of internal organs no less than 150 times. It could be imagined how abnormal this incantation was. Zhang Yan shook his head. There was almost no shortcut to this kind of multitasking, and he could only rely on repeated attempts to increase his proficiency. Moreover, because every death was an incomparably real experience, he could not help but secretly laugh at himself. He estimated that after he finished practicing this Taoist incantation, he would be able to achieve the level of a master in qi deviation. He believed that those cultivators who had never come into contact with this Taoist book, if they did not have the protection of their masters, they would most likely die on the spot. It was no wonder that Luo Xiao said that this book would easily attract the jealousy of the heavens. If anyone could master this book without relying on any external objects and only relying on their own talent and comprehension, not only would the heavens not let them go, if it was possible, Zhang Yan also wanted to throw a lightning bolt and strike that person to death. He used more than a month to hone his control of qi, which was almost equivalent to his doppelganger in the jade for 10 months, and only then did he become familiar with the entire set of qi circulation. Up until now, he did not know how many times his doppelganger had died. Fortunately, he had a strong will. If it was someone else, they would probably go crazy from the boring qi circulation. But on the other hand, it was not that Zhang Yan did not gain anything from this cultivation. At least this book almost included all the methods and techniques of qi circulation in the current cultivation. He believed that at this moment, there was almost no one in the same cultivation who could compare to him in terms of qi circulation control. But in this more than a month, there was no movement from Luo Xiao in the treasure cauldron. Could it be that he was really dead? Zhang Yan stood up and was about to go and find out when he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. Is Zhang Yan here? Come out and talk. He could not help but shiver. He took 2 steps out of the cave residence and saw a handsome cultivator in white standing in the air in front of the plank road. Ning Chongxian. Zhang Yan calmly cupped his hands and said, Senior brother Ning. He quickly calculated in his mind. He did not know why Ning Chongxian came here to find him. Could it be that he had found out about Luo Xiao? Impossible. If that was the case, he would have rushed in long ago. Ning Chongxian glanced at him, suddenly stepped forward and put his hand on his shoulder. It's not convenient to talk here, follow me. Zhang Yan only felt his vision blurred. When he saw the surrounding scenery again, he had already appeared at the top of a lonely peak, and under his feet was a bottomless abyss. His body just swayed slightly, and he adjusted from the initial discomfort and stood firmly again. Ning Chongxian nodded and praised, Very good, a cultivator should reject external things and only keep one's true self. You need to know that all kinds of obstacles are born from the heart. If the heart is unstable, the spirit will not be born. His current look was very different from the day he left, and there seemed to be a hint of appreciation in his eyes. Zhang Yan did not know what he was playing at. I have searched back and forth in this mountain for 2 months, but I still haven't found any trace of the snake demon. I think it is either seriously injured and dead, or hiding somewhere. But I will return to the mountain gate soon and have no time to look for it. You are the only cultivator on this peak. When I leave, it may come out to harm you. So I will give you something that will definitely save your life. Ning Chongxian pointed with his finger, and a jade light flew into Zhang Yan's sleeve. In a hurry, he could not see what it was. Go, remember to keep your heart. If there is fate in the future, I will introduce you to an immortal master. Ning Chongxian stretched out his hand and pushed. Zhang Yan's body slightly swayed, but he did not feel anything. When he looked up, it turned out that he had returned to the foot of the stargazing peak. But at this moment, he did not know that shortly after he was taken away by Ning Chongxian, a figure came to the door of his cave residence and looked inside. Suddenly, his face lit up with joy and he dashed in. Chapter 25. During the 2 months that Zhang Yan was cultivating, there were some changes on Mount Kangwu. Zheng Sun returned to the Zheng family and successfully opened his meridians. The meridian he condensed was of the lower grade and his future was limitless. He had stepped onto the path of immortality and would soon head to the upper house to cultivate more advanced techniques. He no longer had any attachment to the lower house. The lower house was also in an uproar. With Zheng Sun's departure, there was an empty spot for the inner disciple position. Some nominal disciples from aristocratic families were running around for the spot. If nothing went wrong, Lin Yuan would be the new eldest disciple of the lower house. The door to his residence was almost trampled by the people. As Lin Yuan's younger brother, Lin Tong also tried his best to get a position in the lower house. However, Lin Yuan ignored him. Although the position of the eldest disciple was right in front of him, it was not done yet. Moreover, Shi Shoujing had long set her eyes on Ai Zhongwen. Moreover, Ai Zhongwen had a lot of connections in the sect. If nothing went wrong, Ai Zhongwen would be the inner disciple. Although there was a rift between Lin Yuan and Ai Zhongwen because of Zhang Yan, Ai Zhongwen was from the Ai clan of Anfeng after all. It was not convenient for him to suppress him. When Lin Tong saw that he couldn't get through Lin Yuan's connections, and he was on good terms with Chen Lan, he decided to seek help from the latter. However, for some unknown reason, Chen Lan's attitude was also ambiguous, and she refused to stand up for him. She only mentioned that she was lacking an alchemy artifact. Lin Tong was confused. Where did he get a magic tool for alchemy? After asking around, he found out that Chen Lan seemed to like the turbid suppression cauldron that Master Shi Shoujing had given to Zhang Yan. Lin Tong could not help but think, I heard that Zhang Yan is on good terms with AI Zhongwen. Why don't I ask him to persuade Zhang Yan to hand over the cauldron? I'll give him some benefits. He did not expect that he would be scolded by AI Zhongwen the moment he opened his mouth. Lin Tong could not help but swear, I'll definitely teach you a lesson after I become the inner disciple. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't convince Zhang Yan to hand over the cauldron. In the end, he made up his mind and said, I might as well steal that cauldron. He knew that Zhang Yan was an expert in martial arts, so he did not dare to force his way in. However, he also found out that Zhang Yan was the only one in the cave, and there were no servants serving him. He decided to steal the cauldron when Zhang Yan was not around, and then bury it on the mountain. When night fell, he would dig it up and give it to Chen Lan. Now that senior brother Chen has this cauldron, he will definitely speak up for me. Lin Yuan secretly made up his mind and wandered around the stargazing peak day and night, watching from afar, but Zhang Yan seemed to never go out, only blindly cultivating behind closed doors. He suffered for more than 2 months, and when he was almost desperate, he found that Zhang Yan was taken away by a white-robed cultivator. He was immediately overjoyed and refused to miss the opportunity. He hurried forward and looked inside the cave mansion, and sure enough, there was no trace of anyone. He rushed towards the big cauldron. But he heard a cold shout from his side, Who are you? Lin Tong was shocked and looked back, only to see a charming woman standing there. The woman's eyebrows looked like they had been delicately drawn with a brush, and beneath them was a pair of enchanting eyes. Her figure was curvaceous, and her neck revealed a large area of skin that was as delicate as suet white jade. Just one look at her would make one's blood boil. Lin Tong was startled and said, You are Zhang Yan's maidservant? Tiske, you are a little beauty, why not follow me? Hearing this, the woman raised her thin eyebrows, and a murderous look flashed in her beautiful eyes. She shouted, You are courting death. Zhang Yan walked up the mountain path from the bottom of the mountain, thinking about Ning Chongshuan's intention. Ning Chongshuan's last sentence showed that he was a disciple of the master and disciple lineage, which meant that the other party should have discovered his value, so he was trying to rope him in. But this was not good news, because it meant that the struggle in the upper house was more intense than he imagined. But it was still too early to think about this, and everything had to wait until he opened his meridians. After returning to the Immortal's cave, he stepped through the door and saw a charming woman looking at him affectionately. As soon as she saw Zhang Yan come in, she immediately stepped forward and timidly pulled on Zhang Yan's sleeve, sobbing, I've been looking for young master for so many years, but today I finally found young master. Zhang Yan glanced at her and walked in expressionlessly. The woman rolled her eyes and hugged him from behind, a pair of plump breasts leaning against his back, and said sadly, Have you forgotten me, young master Zhang? Zhang Yan's expression did not change and said, Why do you have to be like this, brother Luo? You and I see each other every day, and we share a room every day, how can I not recognize you? The woman was startled, and her face immediately turned red. She hurriedly let go of his hand and jumped to the side. She bit her lower lip and stomped her feet, and said angrily, Damn, I forgot that you, a little thief, can identify aura. Then she became dissatisfied and said, Hey, who shares a room with a little thief like you every day, don't spoil my innocence for no reason. Zhang Yan shook his head and cupped his hands, saying, Brother Luo, you are full of grievances, congratulations. It was obviously congratulatory words, but his tone was flat, and it sounded insincere. Luo Xiao couldn't help but glare at him hatefully, and said unhappily, I can only transform for the time being, my cultivation still needs to recover slowly. Zhang Yan took large strides inside, and couldn't help but look surprised, because he found that the inside of the cave residence had changed. Not only were the walls as clean as a mirror, the ground was also spotless, and even the firewood and charcoal that were originally numerous had been moved out. Everything was placed in separate rows, and the previous messy appearance was different. Luo Xiao said proudly, "Look at you, you don't even know how to clean the cave residence." It was not that Zhang Yan didn't like cleanliness, but the cave residence was spacious, and he didn't even have time to cultivate, so where would he find the time to clean it? Moreover, during the end of the world, his life could be in danger at any time, and he was in a precarious situation. Having a safe place to stay was also extravagant, so he didn't really care about the environment around him. He only cleaned up the areas that he usually lived in as much as possible. However, he shook his head and said, "I don't think it's clean enough." "How is it not clean?" Luo Xiao raised her eyebrows, and she was immediately unconvinced. Zhang Yan pointed at the treasure cauldron and said in a deep voice, "Who's in the cauldron?" Just when Lin Tong was scheming to steal the cauldron, he did not expect the situation on Azure Parasol Mountain to change unexpectedly. What shocked everyone was that the upper house actually sent another person to replace Zheng Sun's position. Lin Yuan was happy for nothing in the end, and only then did he find out that Zheng Sun had gone to the upper house not only to take over his clansman's legacy, but also to make room for him so that he could secure the position of the lower house's first disciple. Even so, the crowd did not lose their composure. When the person was escorted to the main hall by the crowd, they realized that the person who had become the first disciple of the lower house in the blink of an eye was only a boy of 14 or 15 years old. The boy's eyes were bright, and his face was delicate. Although he tried his best to look mature, his age was still there, and the disciples felt indescribably strange and uncomfortable. Where did this kid come from? Someone below whispered to each other. I heard that he's the son of the Du clan. Someone added in a low voice, I heard that he's only 15 years old this year. When he was 9, he had already achieved nascent soul enlightenment, and he only waited for 6 years to condense a high-grade pulse. Rumor has it that his father is an elder of the upper house, and his mother is the famous beauty of the Du clan in Hin, Du Luo. The crowd's hearts trembled. Putting aside the position of an elder in the upper house, the Du clan's influence was also greater than the 3 major sections. It was no wonder that the 3 lower house chief mentors did not say anything about this matter, and tacitly agreed to it. At that moment, the people who were prepared to make a fuss became silent. The boy glanced at the disciples present, and with his hands behind his back, he raised his head and puffed out his chest, and said in an old-fashioned manner, My name is Du Yu, and I'm here today to be your first disciple. The disciples lowered their eyes and did not say anything. Du Yu's little face showed slight dissatisfaction. Seeing this, a person who looked like a steward at the side quickly stood up and said, Disciples, why aren't you paying your respects to the first disciple of the lower house? Lin Yuan could not help but snort heavily, and the rest of the people also ignored him. We're all from the Xianmen aristocratic families, and we admit that your Du clan is powerful, but a mere servant dares to order us around? Isn't he looking down on us a little too much? Do you also knew that it was not good to be too forceful, and quickly signaled the steward with his eyes to leave? He coughed and said, Are all the disciples here today? As soon as he said this, someone stood up and said, in reply to first disciple, There's still one disciple who hasn't arrived today. The crowd looked over, and it turned out to be Zhenlun. This person was also one of the 5 disciples whose cultivation was nascent soul enlightenment. Although he knew that the Zhen clan and the Du clan had a close relationship, the way he addressed him as first disciple was a little too frank. Oh, don't the lower house have 28 disciples? Senior disciple Zheng Sun has left, isn't the number just right? Du Yu pretended to be doubtful as he looked around. Zhenlun continued, The lower house guru Shi Shoujing has accepted a new disciple. His name is Zhang Yan, so the lower house originally has 29 disciples. Surnamed Zhang? Do you know which Zhang clan he is from? This person is not from an aristocratic family. Du Yu frowned and said angrily, He is not from an aristocratic family. How can he enter my lower house? Zhenlun replied, This person single-handedly defeated the Guangyuan sect at the spell gathering, so the guru made an exception and accepted him as a disciple. Lin Yuan watched the two of them as if they were putting on a show, and the corner of his mouth revealed a slight sneer. Do you really think that I can't see through your tricks? Du Yu knew that he was still young and could not convince the crowd. Coming to the upper house, he first had to establish his authority. Originally, he wanted to make an example out of Lin Yuan, but this person's background was not simple, and he was not easy to deal with. The other disciples were all from aristocratic families, and it was not that they were not powerful enough, but that they could not find a reason to intimidate the crowd. However, he had already investigated beforehand, and it just so happened that one of the new disciples was not from an aristocratic family, and had no foundation in the sect, so it was suitable for him to make an example out of him. Do you ask knowingly, today I gathered all the disciples, why didn't Zhang Yan come to pay his respects? Zhen Lun said, this Zhang Yan has always been unruly, and when senior disciple Zheng was around he was already disobedient. Even senior disciple Lin couldn't do anything about him, and I think that senior disciple Lin might not even care about him. Hearing this, Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of anger. Du glanced at Lin Yuan, and said loudly, senior disciple Zheng can't control him, and senior disciple Lin can't control him, but I can. Someone, bring me my ruler. Immediately, a man who looked like a strong man walked out, and respectfully brought a sparkling white jade ruler in front of Du Yu. This was a magical weapon given to him by Du Yu's mother, Du Luo, and it was called the Discipline Ruler. Once it was used, anyone below the clear qi stage, no matter what cultivation level they had, would immediately be knocked to the ground, unable to move their qi, unable to come out, just like a disabled person. After 3 consecutive strikes, they would immediately die. Du took the ruler and handed it over to the steward beside him, and said coldly, Steward Hao, go and arrest Zhang Yan. If he disobeys, beat him to death. Chapter 26. Steward Hao had already inquired about Zhang Yan's residence beforehand. After receiving the order, he rushed to Stargazing Peak with 2 attendants. He had been in the Du family for a long time and had also practiced qi to seek Dao. It was just that he was limited by his aptitude and could not open his meridians. However, it was not a problem for him to drive a talisman. He was originally a servant in the Du family. This time, he followed young Master Du Yu to the lower house of the Yingcang sect. He finally felt that there was a day where he could make a name for himself. Now that he had the opportunity to personally detain a new disciple, he could not help but feel proud. He walked all the way to the entrance of Zhang Yan's abode of Immortals Cave. Without announcing anyone, he pushed the door open and walked inside. He deliberately avoided looking at the people inside the abode of Immortals Cave and pretended to ask, where is Zhang Yan? Zhang Yan was originally about to deal with Lin Tong, who was stuffed into the cauldron by Luo Xiao. Suddenly, he saw Steward Hao barge in as if there was no one else around. His expression immediately turned cold and said, Who are you? Steward Hao put his hands behind his back and said with his head held high, Zhang Yan, I am the steward of the lower house. Today, the head disciple of the lower house, Du, has gathered all the disciples to the side hall for a discussion. Everyone is going, why are you the only one not going? I am here on young master's order to take you for questioning. Why are you not kneeling and admitting your crimes? Head disciple of the lower house? Du? Zhang Yan was slightly puzzled and immediately became alert. Did the situation in the lower house change? He looked at the other's posture and suddenly realized something. He sneered, let's not talk about whether you are guilty or not. I am a new disciple. You are just a servant, how dare you arrest me? Cut the crap. Are you going to tie your hands or wait for me to take them? Although Steward Hao had a talisman in his hand, Zhang Yan had a fierce reputation. Moreover, his mana and cultivation were far above his. Coupled with Zhang Yan's imposing figure, he was actually nervous. Just as Steward Hao raised the restraint ruler, Zhang Yan's body suddenly tensed up. His hair stood on end as a sense of extreme danger emanated from the ruler. Just from the immense aura emanating from it, Zhang Yan could tell that it was an extremely powerful magic tool. Zhang Yan looked solemn. He quietly put his hand into his sleeve and grasped something. It was a protective item given to him by Ning Chongxian. He didn't know how useful it was. When Steward Hao saw that Zhang Yan was indeed unwilling to submit, he thought to himself, you're the one who's looking for death, so you can't blame me. He raised the restraining ruler and was about to release it to hit Zhang Yan, but before he could make a move, his hands suddenly became empty. The next moment, he was dumbfounded to see that a beautiful woman was playing with the ruler in her hands with great interest. Steward Hao was in a daze for a long time before he came back to his senses. He couldn't help but shout, "Quickly return my transcendent artifact." Luo Xiao spat and said disdainfully, "How dare you pretend to be a transcendent artifact with this kind of crude refinement?" Steward Hao was so angry that he was about to go crazy. He said, "You lowly servant, I'm the steward of the Du clan. Do you know that the Du clan, the Du?" Zhang Yan shook his head. He didn't want to waste time with him. He took 2 steps forward, grabbed his arm, and threw him out. Outside the cave was a plank road. Steward Hao was instantly scared out of his wits. Fortunately, Zhang Yan didn't use too much strength. In a fluster, Steward Hao managed to hold onto the plank road firmly. Otherwise, he might have fallen to pieces. Seeing that the situation was not good, the 2 attendants quickly pulled him up. Steward Hao had suffered. How could he dare to stay here any longer? He immediately ran back in a panic. Zhang Yan's face darkened. Before he went into seclusion, he heard from Ai Zhongwen that Zheng Sun had returned to the clan to open his meridians. Now that he thought about it, this Du Yu who claimed to be the first disciple of the lower house must have taken over Zheng Sun's original position. He could more or less guess what this Du was planning. It seemed that it was not appropriate to not have the strength or identity to intimidate everyone. Ning Chongxian had given him something, so he might have to borrow it today. Luo Xiao picked up the prudential ruler and played with it a few times. Suddenly, she rolled her eyes and giggled. She seemed to have thought of some wicked idea. She picked up Lin Tong, who was unconscious in the cauldron, and stuffed the ruler into Lin Tong's sleeve. Zhang Yan looked at her and said, "What are you doing?" Luo Xiao clapped her hands and said proudly, "If I'm not wrong, this ruler must be a pair. Just sit back and watch the show." Du waited in the main hall for 2 hours. Just as he was getting impatient, a disheveled steward Hao came back. As soon as he entered the main hall, he cried out, "Young master, please calm your anger." This old servant was careless and made a mistake, causing the magic weapon to be taken away by Zhang Yan. "I beg the young master to punish me." Du opened his mouth and suddenly became furious. He pointed at Steward Hao and cursed, "Nonsense, Zhang Yan is just an essence-building cultivator. My magic weapon can be knocked over by a cultivator at the clear chi stage. How could it be taken away by him?" Steward Hao said with a sullen face, "Although the magic treasure is good, before this old servant could use it, it was taken by Zhang Yan." He originally wanted to say that it was taken by a servant girl, but when the words reached the tip of his tongue, he was afraid of losing face, so he immediately changed his words. Du secretly cursed him as a waste. This steward Hao was also brought by him from the Du clan. He did not want him to be like this. The more he looked at him, the more annoyed he felt. His face sank as he said, "I lost my magic weapon, what use do you have?" Steward Hao's body trembled. He was familiar with Du Yu's temperament, so he knew what he wanted to do. He immediately called out, "Young master, spare." He had not even finished speaking when a white light flashed in the main hall. Kachu's sound was heard. His head had already cracked open, and he died on the spot. Du stretched out his hand and gently beckoned. A fluorescent and translucent jade ruler that was as thin as a cicada's wing flew back into his palm. Lin Yuan's eyelids twitched as he looked at the scene from the side. This Du actually had more than one magic weapon in his hands? Du frowned as he tried to pinch the magic weapon back and forth a few times. But he did not get a response from the magic weapon. He thought that the magic weapon was being suppressed by someone else, and could not escape. A person could die, but a magic weapon could never be lost. He sneered and said, "Zhang Yan, do you really think that my magic weapon is so easy to take?" At the moment, the ruler in his hand was called the fixed ruler. It was a pair with the constrained ruler. The main ruler and the auxiliary ruler were mutually attracted to each other. Du muttered a spell in his heart and said, "Go." A white light flew out of his hand and instantly passed through the main hall. A moment later, 2 white lights flew back into the main hall at the same time and steadily landed in his hand. It was the pair of jade rulers. He silently checked in his heart and knew that the fixed ruler had already taken someone's life. The corner of his mouth slightly curled up. He turned around and pointed to the two strong men beside him and said, "You two, go and bring back Zhang Yan's corpse." The two strong men acknowledged and left the main hall. Du looked around and said slowly, "Junior brothers, please wait for a moment." Zhang Yan was so arrogant. "As the eldest disciple of the lower house, I will naturally give you an explanation." All 28 of them, including Lin Yuan, looked down and didn't say a word. Du did not care. When he brought back Zhang Yan's corpse, these people would naturally know what he was up to. The two strong men moved very quickly. About an hour later, they returned to recover their lives. Du could not hold back and asked anxiously, "Where is Zhang Yan?" The strong man replied, "Zhang Yan is outside the main hall." Du nodded with satisfaction and said, "Come, bring the corpse here." The strong man hesitated for a moment and then waved his hand. Two long men carried a bloody corpse. This person's head was smashed and his face was blurred. The disciples secretly shook their heads. Although they all looked down on Zhang Yan's background, they also thought that Zhang Yan could be considered an outstanding person. What he did on the Earth Gate was also admirable. They did not expect that he would die in the hands of a young man today. It could be said that he was unlucky. Du glanced at the crowd and saw that there seemed to be fear in their eyes. He could not help but feel proud. He pointed at the corpse and pretended to ask, "This is Zhang Yan?" Originally, he did not expect anyone to answer this question. The strong man hesitated and said, This person seems to be Zhang Yan. Seems to be Zhang Yan?" Du turned his head and suddenly stared at the strong man. The strong man was shocked. He was also present when Steward Hao was beaten to death. He could not help but stutter. There was someone waiting outside the door. He said that he was also Zhang Yan. Du was furious. He pointed at the corpse and said, "That person is Zhang Yan. This person is also Zhang Yan. How many Zhang Yans are there in the lower house?" A clear voice came from outside. The person who was beaten to death is Brother Lin Yuan's junior brother, Lin Tong. What? Lin Yuan was startled and immediately cried out, "Zhang Yan? Why are you?" A tall figure walked into the main hall under everyone's gaze. Who else could it be but Zhang Yan? Lin Yuan's heart skipped a beat. Could the person who was beaten to death really be Lin Tong? Zhang Yan walked into the main hall and stood still. His expression was calm. He first cupped his hands to everyone and then said, "Just now, I was chatting happily with Brother Lin in the cave. Suddenly, an evil servant came out and said that he wanted to capture me. Brother Lin was furious and argued with the evil servant. Who knew that the evil servant wanted to injure you? So Brother Lin took the jade ruler from the person's hand and kept it in his bosom. He said that he would return it to the owner of the treasure in the future. Who knew that not long after the evil servant left, another ruler suddenly flew out and hit Brother Lin's head on the spot, causing him to die a violent death. He sighed and said with a sigh, "I have always been on good terms with Brother Lin and admire his character. Who would have thought that he would die in the hands of a vile person today? What a pity." Lin Yuan's expression was strange. Of course, he knew his younger brother Lin Tong's temperament. What Zhang Yan said was most likely not true. But now, he could only tacitly agree with Zhang Yan's statement. Could he say that Lin Tong saw the treasure and was seeking his own death? No matter what, Lin Tong was his younger brother. Now that he was killed for no reason, even if it was for his own face, he had to come out and defend Zhang Yan's words. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel disgusted. "You are Zhang Yan?" Du's 2 consecutive attacks had failed, causing him to lose a lot of face in front of his fellow disciples. At this moment, he was even mocked by Zhang Yan as a vile person. He was already mad with anger. His eyes were red as he looked at Zhang Yan. Suddenly, he shouted and 2 white lights flew out from his hands towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. Seeing the 2 rulers flying down from above, he also waved his hand, and a streak of green light flew out from his sleeve. "Ka-ka" suddenly resounded in the air, as if 2 pieces of metal were breaking. The 2 jade rulers that were originally shining with a bright white light unexpectedly fell to the ground. Seeing this, Lin Yuan couldn't help but cry out, "Spirit tool?" All the disciples were shocked. This was a spirit tool that had spirituality and could be moved at will. Compared to Du Yu's magic tools that still needed to be activated, it was many times better. Today, Du Yu continuously took out magic tools to hit people, which already made everyone sigh at the Du family's generosity. They didn't expect that Zhang Yan actually had a spirit tool on him. What was this Zhang Yan's background? AI Zhongwen said that this person's background was extraordinary. Could it be that he was really a disciple that was deliberately hidden and cultivated by some aristocratic family? For a moment, everyone looked at Zhang Yan with a complicated gaze. Chapter 27. When the two jade rulers fell to the ground, they had already lost their luster. It was obvious that they were heavily injured. Du Yu's youthful face was slightly twisted. He reached out his hand and touched the black ink stone in his sleeve. He thought, even if I have to endure mother's scolding, I will kill this Zhang Yan here today. Bruce, stop. Just as he was about to make a move, he suddenly heard a loud shout. A middle-aged man wearing a blue robe and a mixed essence crown walked in. He was still outside the hall when he took a step forward, but when he took a step forward, everyone's vision blurred. He was already next to Du Yu and grabbed his wrist, stopping his next move. So close, so close. This person is obviously an expert at the third level of the mystic light realm. That's why he can control the mystic light and shrink the ground within a few miles. Lin Yuan was knowledgeable, and he could tell how powerful this middle-aged man was with one glance. When Du Yu saw the person, he said in surprise, "Uncle Bo?" The middle-aged man ignored Du Yu and turned to Zhang Yan. He said in a pleasant tone, "Zhang Yan, today's matter has nothing to do with you. It's not your fault. You can leave now." Du Yu opened his mouth, but he was stopped by the middle-aged man's stern gaze. He had no choice but to endure it. He could only stare at Zhang Yan with eyes full of murderous intent. Zhang Yan's expression became serious. This middle-aged man gave him an extremely strong pressure, and his aura was similar to Ning Chongxian's. They were obviously experts of the same realm. However, Ning Chongxian's aura was fierce but not ostentatious. It wasn't targeted at others, but this middle-aged man had an aura that was like a raging wave crashing against the shore. In his eyes, the surrounding scenery and even the entire hall was shaking as if it was being swept by a monstrous wave. With such an expert standing beside him, I'm afraid that if it wasn't for that person who recognized the origin of this spirit tool, I might not have been able to walk out alive today. However, on the path of cultivation, there were times when one had to face things head-on. If one retreated at the first sign of danger, then one would find all sorts of excuses when faced with other difficulties in the future. It would be fine if it happened once or twice, but once one had a fixed mindset, the originally firm Dao heart would become dispirited and would no longer be resilient. As expected, the only way to improve one's cultivation was to work hard. He secretly made up his mind. Today, I'm not as good as this person, but that doesn't mean I won't be able to in the future. With this person and Ning Chongxian as my goal, I must always remember the humiliation I suffered today and use it as a whip. One day, I must personally seek justice for this. In the main hall, Du Yu wanted to teach Zhang Yan a lesson today, but he couldn't. He was too ashamed to show off in front of all the new disciples. After saying a few perfunctory words, he dismissed all the disciples. Back at the residence of the eldest disciple in the back hall, Du Yu complained to the middle-aged man, "Uncle Bo? Why did you stop me today?" Uncle Bo was called Du Bo. He was the bodyguard sent by Du Yu's father, whose identity was still unknown, to secretly protect him. Originally, this person didn't have this name, but in order to cover up his identity, he changed his name and claimed to be a disciple of the Du family. Du Bo shook his head and said in a deep voice, "If I'm not mistaken, what Zhang Yan used just now was the divine shuttle." Divine shuttle? Du Yu was stunned. He seemed to have heard of this name, but he couldn't remember it for a while. Du Bo reminded him, "You can't remember the divine shuttle, but your nephew must have heard of the 12 sky shuttles, right?" Du Yu was shocked and cried out involuntarily, 12 sky shuttles, isn't that the magic weapon used by the sect leader when he was young? Yes, the divine shuttle is an imitation of the 12 sky shuttles. It was made by Elder Sun Jian of the sect. Elder Sun is the 9th disciple of the sect leader, the backbone of the master and disciple line. This Zhang Yan can get one of the divine shuttles, so he must have a close relationship with the sect leader. And your identity is special, so it's not appropriate to kill him now. Du Bo pointed out the pros and cons and pointed out Zhang Yan's possible background. It wasn't that he couldn't kill him, but he really couldn't. Anyone who had a relationship with the sect leader of the Yingtsang sect couldn't be considered by himself. Du came from the aristocratic family and was raised as the future pillar of the family since he was young. He still understood this principle. However, he was still young after all, a disciple who did not come from an aristocratic family. Right now, he could not suppress him, he could not control him, and he could not hit him either. It was really sullen. He could not help but hatefully say, "As long as I am the eldest disciple, Zhang Yan will not be able to take away any of the elixirs, hua qi, Taoist books or instruments bestowed by the upper house. Only by ruthlessly depriving Zhang Yan of the things that originally belonged to him could he vent a little of the anger in his heart." However, Du Bo's face was full of disapproval and he scolded, "Nephew, don't forget, the position of the lower house's eldest disciple is only temporarily borrowed. It's only to be able to use the shellfish field properly and use the Shell King True Nectar to open a high-grade pulse no less than that of the sect leader's disciple. How can you wholeheartedly be attached to this position?" Du was reprimanded by Du Bo, but he didn't get angry. Instead, his eyes brightened. He couldn't help but stand up and hurriedly asked, "Uncle Bo, has the sect leader agreed to borrow the Shell King True Nectar to open the pulse?" "I'm here today to tell you." Du Bo smiled slightly and gestured for Du Yu to sit down. Seeing that the latter barely calmed down and sat down, he then slowly told the whole story. 2 months ago, my Yingtsang sect took over the fluorescent cloud shellfish field. This time, we put in a lot of effort in fighting for the Du clan. Many of our disciples died or were injured. Therefore, the sect leader agreed to lend you the Shell King of this shellfish field for a month to open the pulse. In order not to cause dissatisfaction among the other families, the sect spent a lot of effort. This matter had already been decided before you came up the mountain, but we were afraid that you wouldn't be able to control your temper, so we didn't tell you. Du couldn't help but be overjoyed. If it wasn't for Du Bo, he might have jumped up and shouted a few times. Everyone knew that using the Shell King True Dew to open the meridians would result in a high-grade pulse. In addition, his meridian opening technique was also a secret technique of the sect. It was not difficult to condense a high-grade pulse. Even the legendary high-grade pulse was possible. Du Bo saw that he seemed to be a little carried away and reminded him, "Now, although the families have accepted our gifts on the surface, they are all secretly watching. Therefore, it is better to be quiet than to move. Since that Zhang Yan has colluded with the sect leader's faction, I advise you not to create unnecessary trouble, lest the families accidentally catch us and cause unexpected changes." Du nodded seriously and said, "Uncle Bo, I remember." He then snorted, "In this case, that Zhang Yan got lucky." "Got lucky?" Du Bo chuckled and said, "Just now, Zhang Yan has already suffered some internal injuries under the pressure of my Xian light, which made him suffer." "Why not directly?" Du didn't understand. Since Du Bo could silently hurt Zhang Yan, he must be able to kill him secretly. Why not take the opportunity to make a move? Du Bo shook his head and said, "If I wanted to take his life, the Rui spirit shuttle would definitely fly up to protect its owner. At that time, I would have to destroy this treasure to restrain it. However, this shuttle is connected to its owner's heart and blood. Once it is damaged, the owner of this treasure will definitely be alerted. It is not worth offending this person just for Zhang Yan." Because of all these concerns, Du Bo allowed Zhang Yan to leave safely today. Moreover, if you want to deal with Zhang Yan, you don't have to be in a hurry. Du Bo said earnestly, "Cultivators like us are the foundation. Once you obtain the Shell King and condense a high-grade pulse, with my Du clan as your backing, it will be easy for you to get back your face. Between a mere lower house disciple and a true disciple, don't tell me the upper house immortals can't tell which is more important?" Du nodded in agreement. He was a young man and his thoughts were always straightforward. If someone insulted his face, he also wanted to take revenge and didn't like to beat around the bush. However, since Du Bo said it like this, he could only listen no matter how unwilling he was. Du Bo seemed to see through his thoughts and smiled, Nephew, you seem to be worried. Fine, I will teach you a method. You don't need to make a move and you can still peel off the skin of Zhang Yan's face, making him unable to stand on the mountain. Diyu's eyes lit up and he jumped up. What method? Uncle Bo, please teach me. The cave residence on the star-gazing peak is the property of the lower house. As the eldest disciple, you have the responsibility to arrange a place for the disciples to cultivate. I heard that Zhang Yan is living alone on the star-gazing peak. You can order Zhang Yan to retract the star-gazing peak and say that there are other arrangements. Then order Zhang Yan to move to the moon-grasping peak. However, the lower house disciples are different from him. If he goes there shamelessly, he will definitely be ostracized by them. However, I see that Zhang Yan is arrogant and would rather break than bend. If you take away his residence, he will definitely not have the face to stay on the mountain. In this way, you can easily drive him off the mountain. You can also pretend that you don't see the heart, and it won't be too late to find trouble with him in the future. As an inner disciple, it was reasonable for Zhang Yan to move to the moon-grasping peak. No one could find fault with it. On the contrary, the disciples who didn't know the truth would praise senior brother Du for being considerate to his junior brother. If Zhang Yan stayed on the star-gazing peak and didn't leave, it would give the people an excuse to deal with him. But if he was driven out of his original residence, would he still have the face to stay on the mountain? And without the cave residence, could he still cultivate in peace? Du Bo's plan could be said to be a drastic measure. Good idea, good idea. Uncle Bo, please wait a moment, I will immediately order the people to do it. Do you thought of this method, the better it was. He excitedly ran out to arrange it. Chapter 28. At sunrise, a small golden sword pierced into Zhang Yan's cave with a slight buzzing sound. Zhang Yan caught it and opened the letter on the golden sword. He was surprised. You want me to leave Stargazing Peak and cultivate at Moon-Seizing Peak? He chuckled and casually tossed it aside. He knew Du Yu's intention. It was to make him too ashamed to stay on Mount Azure Parasol. However, he did not care and played with the small golden sword in his hand. This should be the legendary Howling Lake Golden Sword. During the Xianwen Assembly, Ai Zhongwen had suggested for Zheng Sun to use the Howling Lake Golden Sword to invite Zhang Yan to fight against Mo Yuan. However, Zheng Sun and the other disciples thought that Zhang Yan was just a mortal and was not worth using the Golden Sword to invite. However, now that Zheng Sun had gone to the upper house and Du Yu had become the lower house's eldest disciple, he used the Howling Lake Golden Sword to invite Zhang Yan to cultivate in another cave abode. Although the purpose was different, it was enough to show that Zhang Yan was no longer the same as before. In just a few months, he had risen from a nameless nominal disciple to an inner disciple with the help of the spell assembly. Even Du Yu, a descendant of an aristocratic family, did not dare to touch him because of his possible background. He could only use the identity of the eldest disciple to force him to leave the mountain. Although every step he took seemed dangerous, he had taken advantage of the situation and never fell into a dead end. Golden Sword, oh Golden Sword, you didn't come that day, but you still have to go through me. Zhang Yan knew that Ai Zhongwen had suggested that Zheng Sun use the Golden Sword to invite him. Now, he was using the object to imply that what was destined to belong to him could not run away and would return to him sooner or later. As for the gifts from the upper house, he was even more dismissive. Since when did the upper house help him in the slightest? It was just that he seemed to be in the limelight recently, which was not a good thing. However, he had intended to use the Shell King in the cave mentioned by Luo Xiao to open his meridians. It was just that it was troublesome for inner disciples to leave the mountain and he was worried that he could not find an excuse. This came at the right time. He could avoid everyone's attention and also have a reasonable excuse. It could be seen that the world was not absolute. A good thing could turn into a bad thing, and a bad thing could turn into a good thing. Furthermore, once he successfully opened his meridians, then his status would also undergo an even greater change. At that time, he would not need to care about the expressions of the people in the lower house. After making up his mind, he put away the golden sword in his hand and said in a clear voice, "Brother Luo, it seems that I have to go down the mountain." Luo Zhao's beautiful eyes turned and her face revealed a bitter expression. She said pitifully, Now I am homeless. I beg young master to take pity on me. Please don't abandon me. Her beautiful eyes were red and swollen. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew her well, he might have been deceived by her. Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo's way of comforting people is really unique. Could it be that you think I was forced to go down the mountain? This Zhang has been studying the Xianyuan's secret manuals for the past 2 months, and I feel that I have already understood the mysteries within. Now I can go look for the Pearl King's true nectar to open my meridians." Luo Xiao exclaimed in surprise. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes and said in surprise, "Looks like fellow Taoist Zhang isn't depressed." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Why should I be depressed? I should be laughing to my heart's content. The lower house is just a temporary place for me to stay on my path of cultivation. Do you think I will be greedy for this place? Now in front of me, there is only opening my meridians and going to the next level. When I come back, the door of the upper house will be opened for me." After hearing what Zhang Yan said, Luo Xiao immediately put away her previous delicate attitude and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist Zhang is really broad-minded and bold. But what I said is true. The disturbance of external things is just a passing cloud. If one is blindly attached to it, it will only confuse one's heart and cause one to lose one's mind. Only by holding fast to the beer can one clear the clouds and see the true spirit." When Zhang Yan heard Luo Xiao's words, it seemed to be very different from what Ning Chongxian had said not long ago. There were hidden hints and they could corroborate each other. He couldn't help but feel moved. These two people seemed to be vaguely pointing out something. Could it be the obstacles that he might encounter when opening his meridians? But since these two people were unwilling to say it directly, it was obviously not something that could be explained with words. There was no point in thinking too much about it now. It would only add to his worries. As long as his Tao determination was strong, there was no need for him to take these things to heart. "I'm sure fellow Taoist Luo has memorized the way to the shell field. I'll need fellow Taoist's guidance." Zhang Yan remembered that Luo Xiao said that the shell field that she discovered the other day seemed to be near the fluorescent cloud shell field. That day, the Yingtsang sect had not completely occupied the shell field, so they must not have controlled it well. The current situation must be very different from before. If they were to go all the way, they might encounter the disciples of the Yingtsang sect who were on duty. Zhang Yan expressed his worries, but Luo Xiao waved her hand heroically and said confidently, "This matter is not a problem. I remember that there is a big swamp in front of the cave. If there are Yingtsang sect disciples on guard, we can sneak through the water first and swim into the big swamp. They won't be able to detect us. Moreover, when I was chasing after the 5 upper house disciples that day, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find the way back, so I left a drop of blood there. With the sudden inspiration, it won't be difficult to find the cave again." Speaking of this, she frowned slightly, "But my only concern is that Shell King. Although the longer the Shell King cultivates, the more beneficial it is to open the meridians with the true dew. But its temperament is tyrannical, and it will easily cause the earth aperture to move. I'm afraid it will attract the attention of the Yingtsang sect disciples." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Before we see the Shell King, it's not good for us to speculate. We can only plan after we enter the cave." Luo Xiao nodded and said, "Of course." Zhang Yan asked again, "But how many days will it take to travel from the Azure Parasol Mountain to the shell field? Why do I need to walk? Fellow Taoist Zhang, you're looking down on me too much." Luo Xiao waved her hand lightly and a trace of pride flashed across her beautiful face. "I'll take you on my mystic light." Zhang Yan carefully looked at Luo Xiao's complexion and said with a smile, "Brother Luo, you haven't recovered from your injuries. We have plenty of time, so let's not force it." Luo Xiao snorted softly and said, "Although my injuries haven't fully recovered, I've already condensed a mystic light. It should be fine for me to fly for 4 to 6 hours every day. The earlier we get there, the earlier I can use the Shell King's true dew to recover from my injuries." At this point, Luo Xiao sighed and stood up from the cattail hassock. She walked around the Dragon Star Sand Cauldron a few times and said regretfully, "It's a waste to leave this cauldron here. If I wasn't injured, it would be a piece of cake for me to bring it along. But now, I don't have the strength to do so. It's a pity that this cauldron is a magic treasure and can be sized as you wish. There's no need to think too much about it. Zhang Yan was open-minded and said indifferently, let's find a mountain peak and bury it. We'll get it later. That's the only way. Luo Xiao originally wanted to bring this cauldron to refine medicine, but it seemed like she had to give up now. The two of them packed up and found a mountain on the stargazing peak to bury the cauldron. Then, they took the rest of the medicine and quietly went down the mountain at night without saying goodbye to anyone. In order to avoid attracting the attention of the Yutsang sect's upper house disciples, they didn't dare to fly for the first 10 days. They only relaxed when they were out of the Great Wei Dynasty's Han province and far away from the Azure Parasol Mountains territory. From here, it'll only take about 6 days. We'll be able to reach a tributary of the fluorescent cloud shell field by following the canal river. Luo Xiao smiled charmingly at Zhang Yan and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, please hold on tight to me. Don't open your eyes when the profound light flies up. Without hesitation, Zhang Yan walked forward and hugged Luo Xiao's waist. He felt that she was warm and soft. Luo Xiao's eyes flickered and revealed a flirtatious look. She glared at Zhang Yan and shouted, Rise. A profound light soared into the sky and flew straight to the north. Half a month after Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao left the mountain, Du also received a letter from his family asking him to go to the fluorescent cloud shell field to open his meridians as soon as possible. Moreover, they also sent him a flying ship in the clouds that could be used as a means of transportation. This flying ship was made by a cultivator in his Du clan who was good at forging weapons. Not only could it carry 100 people, it could also block flying swords. Its speed was also much faster than normal cultivators. This time, the clan had also helped him. For this trip, Du not only had Du Bo accompanying him, but he also brought along 2 clear chi stage disciples from the Du clan. There were also 10 strong men as guards and more than 50 servants. Du looked at the clouds and mist on both sides of the mountain pass by him quickly and couldn't help but feel satisfied. He patted the flying ship and said, I heard that the shell field is called the fluorescent cloud shell field. This flying ship in the clouds is a good compliment. Isn't it hinting that I want to take over the Shell King? Du Bo looked at him and smiled slightly. He sat upright on the cloud canopy of the flying ship without moving. However, after flying for a day and a night, Du also felt slightly bored. He opened his mouth and said, This time, Uncle Bo is accompanying me. He can help me subdue the Shell King and absorb the true Du. However, I wonder how strong the Shell King is? Du Bo laughed loudly and said, The higher the Shell King's cultivation, the better the true Du and the higher your chances of forming your meridians will be. Uncle Bo, I hope that the Shell King won't disappoint me. Du asked curiously, although Uncle Bo is a master at the 3rd level of the Mystic Light Realm, I heard that the Shell King is very violent and is very powerful when it hides in a cave. Moreover, its hard shell can't even be broken by flying swords. How does Uncle Bo plan to deal with it? Du Bo stroked his beard and smiled. He said, Nephew, you might not know this, but the Shell King is very gluttonous and likes a small fish called silver tear fish. As long as we catch some and place them at the entrance of the cave, the Shell King will be lured out when the fishy smell fills the air. Once it leaves the cave, it won't be able to hide and can only be slaughtered by us. Du was puzzled. He said, I've heard Mother talk about all sorts of rumors about the Shell King, but I've never heard of this before. She only said that every time a disciple of the upper house opens their meridians, they will ask a core transformation realm master to catch the Shell King. Du Bo laughed and said, Nephew, although the Shell King can't transform due to the nourishment of the earth vein, it still has its own intelligence. This method can only be used once and it won't fall for it again. However, the Shell King in the Luster Cloud shell field has never tried this method before, so you don't need to worry. I'm here. Luo Xiao had already taken everything valuable from this corpse, so Zhang Yan no longer paid attention to it. He raised his head and looked around. He saw spirit shells wriggling on the walls of the cave, all of them sucking the essence of the earth veins. At a glance, there were at least tens of thousands of them. However, Luo Xiao ignored these spirit shells and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, The Shell King is in the cave hundreds of meters below us. Please follow me. The entire cave extended downward in a spiral shape, and as they walked down, a damp and moldy smell assaulted their nostrils. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, and it was slippery. The two of them walked and stopped for a while. After a while, there was only a wide cave in front of them, and the surroundings were filled with a jade-colored mucus, but it was empty inside. Strange, this is clearly the Shell King's lair. Why isn't it here? Luo Xiao walked around the cave a few times, and then went to the narrow cave that the Shell King usually resided in. From the remaining true dew in the surroundings, she could tell that this was the Shell King's lair. She could not help but frown, and she said, "Could this be a sun shell?" Zhang Yan asked, "Fellow Taoist Luo, what is a sun shell?" Luo Xiao explained, "Shells are divided into yin and yang. Yin shells like to stay still and do not like to move. Even though they can travel in the cave, they will not easily move unless there is a strong enemy. Sun shells are different, and they like to migrate. After staying in one cave for a year or so, they will move to another lair. Seeing that there are only about 10,000 spirit shells outside, this Shell King must have lived here for a long time." Zhang Yan went forward and touched the semi-solid substance that looked like pine resin on the cave wall, and he said, "Is this true dew?" Luo Xiao was a little dispirited, and she sighed, "It is true dew, but looking at the color of this true dew, it has been around for a day. It can be used to open the meridians, but it will still lose a lot of essence. It is best to absorb true dew within a moment." Only a day? This means that the Shell King has not gone far. As Zhang Yan spoke, he unintentionally exerted force, and with a cheech sound he was surprised to find that his arm had actually passed through the thick layer of cream on the cave wall. His eyes flashed, and he took 2 steps back. After taking a few glances, he went forward and tried to drill in again. He found that there was nothing blocking in the depths, so he simply exerted force, and his whole body was actually swallowed inside. Luo Xiao had been watching Zhang Yan's actions, but she found that he did not come out for a long time. Her expression unconsciously tightened, and she called out, "Fellow Taoist Zhang?" With a cheech sound, Zhang Yan, who was covered in the true dew cream, came out from inside. He smiled at Luo Xiao and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, it seems that there is another world behind this cave." Just as the two of them went deep into the cave, a cloud-occupying flying boat landed on the Ying Cloud shell field occupied by the Ying Tsang sect. After a group of more than 60 people came down from the flying boat, Du took out a absorbing tablet, and with a wave, the entire flying boat turned into a small boat the size of a square inch, and he kept it in his sleeve. When the 2 Clear Chi stage disciples who were in charge of guarding the shell field saw this, they immediately came up and scolded, "Who are you? Tell us your names." Du saw that the tone of these 2 people was not friendly, and he was about to flare up, but Du Bo pulled him back and went forward to cup his hands. "I am Du Bo. This is the eldest disciple of the lower house, Du. We have specially come here to find the Shell King to open the meridians. I wonder if the 2 of you on duty have received the order from the sect master?" So it is the disciples of the Du clan. The expressions of the 2 people eased up a lot, and one of them said with his hands cupped, "The sect master has already instructed that if you come, there is no need to stop you. Since this is the case, please do as you please. We are on duty, so we will not accompany you." Du Bo smiled, "Please do as you please." Seeing the 2 of them walk away, Du snorted and said, "They are just 2 disciples of the Clear Chi stage. Why is Uncle Bo so polite to them?" Du Bo smiled and did not say anything. Du had the support of the Du clan, so of course he could do whatever he wanted, but he could not do the same. If he could not offend anyone, he would try his best not to offend anyone. Who knew who was standing behind these 2 disciples? However, there was no need to explain these principles to Du. From his point of view, Du's temperament was not stable, and when he suffered on the path of cultivation, he would naturally restrain himself. The lustrous cloud shell field was backed by the ring-shaped Daily Mountain, and in front of it was the mighty Longyan Lake. The river flowed around the mountain, and looking from the sky, the entire shell field seemed to be surrounded by the 2, like a lonely land. Although it looked like it occupied a large area, the cave entrance of the shell field was actually only 10 feet in size. When Du saw it, the corner of his mouth twitched in disdain. At this point, The servants could only stay outside. Before entering, Du Bo respectfully bowed to the top of the cave where there was no one, and Du did not really understand. Du Bo did not say anything, and went straight into the cave. Du hurriedly followed, and behind him were 2 clear Chi stage disciples and 10 strong men. Not long after, the view in front of them suddenly opened up, and they saw that there was a steep slope on the ground, and on both sides were stone patterns that looked like folds. In front of them was a sunken basin, with a width of more than 100 feet and a height of more than 10 feet. It looked like a flat spoon. As far as the eye could see, there were densely packed spirit shells, and the sparkling and translucent light flickered, like the twinkling stars in the sky. This is the shell field? Du's breathing was slightly heavy. Although he was from an aristocratic family, and spirit shells were not rare to him, when he saw more than 1 million spirit shells gathered together, he could not help but feel shocked. Although this item is good, it does not belong to us. Du Bo patted Du's head. When nephew's cultivation is successful in the future, you can take whatever you want from these spirit shells. Du nodded his head seriously and said, Uncle Bo is right. He clenched his fists, and thought to himself, one day, the owner of this place will definitely be me. Du Bo smiled, and walked into the depths of the cave with his hands behind his back. After walking for about an hour, the group reached the bottom of the cave. But what was strange was that after searching the entire cave, they actually did not see the Shell King. Du Bo frowned, and he thought to himself while stroking his beard, strange, why is the Shell King not in its nest? Could it be a sun shell? But the shell field is so big, and it has been fighting with the 3 lake demons for more than 10 years, so it can't be a sun shell. At this moment, a strong man suddenly shouted, Mr. Du, there is an empty cave here, but I don't know where it leads to. Oh. Du Bo quickly walked over, and pushed away the obstructing true Du in front of him. After taking a closer look, his expression suddenly changed, and he seemed to have thought of something. He could not help but chuckle, and he turned to Du and said, Nephew, if I am not wrong, it should be your opportunity. Du was puzzled, and he asked, Uncle Bo, what do you mean? Du Bo did not point it out, and he only pointed at the acupuncture point, and said with a smile, just follow me. He lowered his head and walked into the empty cave. The path was dark, and no one knew where it led to. After walking for a few miles, Du Bo suddenly raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. He listened for a while and said in a low voice, You wait here, I will go ahead and see what is going on. His feet didn't touch the ground. Instead, he rode the mystic light and slowly approached the exit in front of him. When he came out of the hole quietly, he found that in front of him was a wide cave that was more than 100 feet high. Below it, he saw 2 Shell Kings at a glance. They were only a foot in size, and there was a layer of silver-white soft flesh under their abdomen. Their bone shells looked like they were made of crystal, and they were translucent and bright. The flesh and organs inside were clearly visible, and they gave people a feeling of agility and lightness. The soft light emitted from their bodies actually lit up the whole cave. However, at this moment, they were all gathered in front of a low acupuncture point. From Du Bo's point of view, he could see that it was filled with true Du, and there seemed to be some tiny things squirming inside. Good, I was not wrong. It is indeed the Yin-Yang double Shell Kings. Du Bo stared at the 2 slightly uneasy Shell Kings, and he secretly sneered, harmonizing Yin and Yang, giving birth to the Shell Xian bead. What a good plan. The shell contains the essence of the earth vein. Once it breaks out of the bead, it will definitely be able to get rid of the demon shell and turn into a human. After another 100 years of cultivation, there will definitely be another great demon among the demon race. You actually want to deceive the heaven's secrets. You deserve this calamity in your life. If my nephew swallowed this bead, he will definitely be able to condense the best meridian in the world. Du Bo did not look anymore, and he turned to leave. But because of his agitation, he did not notice that on the opposite wall, there seemed to be 2 figures flashing by. Chapter 30. Yes, that Yin shell must have come from the lustrous cloud shell field. Carefully hiding his body behind the cave, Zhang Yan thought about the cause and effect. Du Bo must be here for Du Yu's meridian opening. What do you plan to do? Luo Xiao looked at Zhang Yan and said, I saw that person just now. He is an expert at the third level of the mystic light stage and has comprehended the mystic light penetrating object. His cultivation is not below Ning Chong Xian. With this person here, the Xian bead will definitely fall into his hands. You have no chance of winning at all. Why don't you retreat now? Retreat? Zhang Yan shook his head and said with determination, I must get this item. Luo Xiao frowned and sighed, if I am at my peak, I can fight with Dubo. But now, she shook her head, obviously not confident. Why do you need to take it by force? Don't you hear the sandpiper and clam fighting? Zhang Yan pointed downwards without the slightest bit of fear in his eyes. The Yin-Yang Shell Kings are all here, and they will definitely fight to the death to protect the profound bead. Although Dubo is brave, it won't be easy for him to capture them. This is our chance. However, Luo Xiao refuted, although the Shell Kings are intelligent, they are still monsters that have yet to develop intelligence. With this person's skills, it is not difficult to kill them with a little trick. What you said is just your own wishful thinking. Zhang Yan smiled confidently and said with certainty, Dubo cannot kill them. But Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. Zhang Yan patted the cave wall and said with a smile, did Luo Xiao forget that this shell field belongs to the Yutsong sect? If the Shell Kings are dead, how can the field be maintained? Dubo will not dare to attack and can only try to capture the Shell Kings. This will be even harder than killing them. Luo Xiao nodded and said, you are right. If this is the case, we do have some chance of winning. Zhang Yan looked past the two Shell Kings and looked at the cave behind them. He thought, the great fortune is right in front of me, how can I retreat? Even though the road ahead is filled with danger, if I don't give it a try, how can I be satisfied? To him, as long as there was a chance of success, he would not give up. He stared at the two Shell Kings that looked like they were made of crystal jade and suddenly turned his head to say, Dao friend, you must be familiar with how the Shell Kings fight? I can't say I'm familiar with them. I just know a thing or two. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, please don't hesitate to tell me. Luo Xiao nodded and didn't ask any further, and she spoke of everything she knew. At this moment, she wanted to see exactly how Zhang Yan would seize that profound bead. Zhang Yan closed his eyes and pondered. After a while, when he opened his eyes, an imperceptible light flashed in the depths of his eyes. From Luo Xiao's description of the Shell King's tactics, he realized that it wasn't that they didn't have a chance, but that they had the best opportunity to attack. It all depended on whether they could grasp it or not. On the other side of the cave, Du Bo returned with a face full of joy. After explaining the situation of the two Shell Kings, Du couldn't help but be ecstatic and applaud repeatedly. All of you, listen carefully. In order to give birth to the shells, the Shell Kings will have to use all their strength. But remember, this is the sect leader's personal property, you can't hurt them, just control them. Du Bo instructed the people below before turning around and rushing into the cave with a group of people. The two Shell Kings that were already feeling uneasy immediately felt that something was wrong. They spread their shell wings and seemed like they were about to flutter. When the Shell Kings were in the cave, they could rely on the true dew silk that they spat out to exert strength that was several times their own. But in the outside world, their strength was reduced by half. It was just that when they were giving birth to the shells, entering the cave would disturb the essence of the earth veins that originally nourished the shells, so they could only stay outside the cave. Du Bo walked forward unhurriedly. He opened his hands and a trace of blue light immediately burst out from his body. With a chua sound, it covered the two Shell Kings and actually made them unable to move for a moment. According to what was previously said, the 10 strong men and 2 clear chi stage disciples behind him immediately went forward. They squeezed into a group and tightly hugged the Yin and Yang Shell Kings that were a foot long. Du was overjoyed and couldn't be bothered to say anything else. He rushed into the cave impatiently. The 2 Shell Kings cried out anxiously and struggled with all their might. The blue light actually couldn't suppress them for a moment. A strong force came and more than 10 strong men were thrown onto the ground. Although the 2 clear chi stage disciples didn't let go, their bodies were lifted up and down by the force. The blood in their bodies couldn't help but churn. Dubo frowned and shouted loudly. The profound light on his body actually emitted the sound of flowing water, and the blue light that was emitted was actually as dense as seawater. Bei, who was surrounded by the light, was immediately pressed to the ground with toots-pa-poch sounds. Seeing that Du was only a few steps away from running into the cave, the layer of gills on the Shell King's outer shell suddenly slightly opened. An indescribable whistling sound spread in all directions. The two clear Chi stage disciples' faces instantly turned pale and they no longer had any strength left in their bodies. The 10 strong men were shaken to the point that they couldn't stand still. They felt dizzy and a nauseous feeling emerged from the bottom of their hearts. Not to mention moving, they couldn't even move their feet. Du simply fell to the ground with its put-ong sound. He was clearly conscious, but his body didn't seem to belong to him. He couldn't move at all. Spirit shell sound? Upon seeing this, Dubo took out a medicinal pill from his body and swallowed it. Not long after, the originally blue profound light gradually turned into a dark blue color, as if it had condensed into a substance. At this moment, the veins on his face swelled up, and the color of blood surged up, intersecting with the blue light. It looked as if a layer of purple had floated up. He said loudly, "All of you, listen carefully. After I drag the Shell Kings into the cave, we will take the opportunity to block their escape route." He then turned to Du Yu, who was lying on the ground, and said, "Nephew, don't panic. This sound can only control people and can't hurt them. Also, the sound can only travel 20 to 30 feet. After we drag the Shell Kings far away, you immediately rush in and swallow the Xian bead." After he finished speaking, he took a step back. The two blue lights were like two giant hands that grabbed the Shell Kings tightly and dragged them along with him. At this moment, Luo Xiao, who was watching the battle from the cave above, couldn't help but be shocked. He praised, "This person is really impressive. He can even speak when using the Xian light to attack his enemy. He has obviously cultivated the Xian light to the point of being able to absorb things and is about to step into the core transformation stage. Human cultivators are indeed 10 times stronger than us demon cultivators in terms of cultivation." She couldn't help but look at Zhang Yan again. In terms of a firm Dao heart, Zhang Yan was the best person she had seen. She wondered how far he could go in the end. At this moment, Zhang Yan was looking down without blinking. From the opponent's actions, he felt that the opportunity he had been waiting for was about to appear. Dubo's forehead was also dripping with sweat. It was obvious that the Shell Kings were giving him a lot of pressure. However, his feet were still as steady as ever. Like an old bull pulling a plow, he slowly moved backwards and dragged the two Shell Kings back to the cave he came from. Even though they kept struggling, they couldn't break free. When Dubo's figure gradually retreated into the cave, about 20 steps later, the pressure on the 10 strong men and the two clear Chi stage disciples lightened. They didn't dare to delay and rushed into the cave to completely block the two Shell Kings' escape route. Dubo's voice came from the depths of the cave. "Nephew, why are you still not going? What are you waiting for?" At this moment, Du also felt that the strange pressure had disappeared. He struggled to stand up and staggered into the cave alone. At this moment, only Du was left in front of the cave. The rest of the people had entered the cave to help suppress the Shell Kings. Luo Xiao and Zhang Yan looked at each other. Both of them could see the flicker of surprise in their eyes. Opportunity! The two of them jumped at the same time, and in a blink of an eye, they followed Du into the cave. Because everyone's attention was focused on the Shell Kings, no one noticed them. Du broke through the cave that was sealed by the true Du. When he raised his head, he saw the profound bead that was filled with essence hanging under a stalactite. The silver light was flowing and flickering. He was overjoyed and went forward to grab it. He shouted, "Uncle Bo, I have found the profound bead." A faint voice came from outside, "Good, good, good. The true Du in the cave cannot be wasted. Nephew, quickly swallow the profound bead and refine the true Du to open your meridians." "Uncle Bo, I can hold on for 3 days. You must dissolve the power within 3 days. Du didn't hesitate anymore and brought the profound bead to his mouth. Just as he was about to swallow it, he suddenly felt something and stretched his hand into his sleeve. Before he could make a move, the back of his head suffered a heavy blow. his eyes went black and he fell to the ground. His hand loosened and the profound bead rolled down. However, it was caught by Zhang Yan, who arrived in time. He suddenly felt a warmth penetrating his heart and spleen. Luo Xiao hurriedly said, "Daoist Zhang, the profound bead is in our hands. We should retreat quickly." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Why should we retreat?" He stared at the profound bead in his hand that was emitting colorful lights and said leisurely, "This place is protected by an expert of the 3rd level of the mystic light stage and has the true Du profound bead inside. It is obviously a great place to open one's meridians." Daoist friend is saying. Zhang Yan pointed at Du Yu, who was lying on the ground, and said, "As long as this person doesn't go out, Du Bo won't dare to let the Shell King go. He said that he can hold on for 3 days, so why not let him hold on for a few more days and grind down his temper?" Luo Xiao muttered, "Although Daoist friend's thoughts are beautiful, if Du Bo becomes suspicious or sends people to check, wouldn't it be terrible? The first 3 days should be fine. Moreover, with Du Yu in our hands, we can force him to lie to Du Bo for a few days when he wakes up. If he doesn't obey, it won't be too late to kill him." Zhang Yan had already made up his mind. Du Yu was a rare commodity in his hands, so how could he not make full use of his value? Luo Xiao thought about it and felt that this method was feasible. She said, "If that's the case, Daoist Zhang, please swallow the profound bead quickly and refine it. I will protect you." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Thank you, Daoist Luo." He didn't hesitate anymore and opened his mouth to swallow the profound bead. Chapter 31. After Zhang Yan swallowed the Xian bead, he immediately sat down to cultivate. Luo Xiao walked around the cave a few times, and her gaze fell on Du Yu. Thinking about how this person seemed to want to take something out when he fell, she couldn't help but be curious. She walked to Du Yu's side, bent down, and searched his body for a while, then took out a sleeve pouch from his sleeve. I heard that the Du family of Helen's influence is spread across the 3 major sects of the Donghua continent. They are indeed generous, giving a universe sleeve pouch to a disciple who hasn't even opened his meridians. The universe sleeve pouch was a talisman used by the cultivators of the Shenmen sect to store their personal belongings. In a sect, usually only disciples above the clear chi stage and who have made contributions could obtain it. Even the mystic light stage disciple that Luo Xiao killed didn't have one. She didn't think that Du Yu would have one before he even opened his meridians. She searched through the pouch. She didn't have much hope at first and only thought that she could find some medicinal pills to comfort herself. However, the results surprised her. First, he took out a black ink stone, and then he found a cloud-patterned vermilion brush. She said in surprise, "Are these Duda's soul-shaking inkstone and destiny brush?" She kicked the unconscious Du Yu and spat, "Luckily I acted quickly, or else I would have fallen into your trap." After searching the talismans for a while, she smiled. "I didn't think that this brat could actually refine these 2 talismans. I wouldn't dare to take such treasures in the hands of others, but a brat like you who hasn't even opened his meridians is nothing." She stretched out her hand and violently wiped away the trace of blood essence from the 2 magic treasures, making them completely ownerless. Although this would reduce the power of the magic treasures, she didn't care. It was fine as long as they could be used now, and she could refine them back in the future. With these 2 talismans, if I fight with Du Bo, even if I can't win, I can still retreat easily. After putting away the 2 talismans, she continued to flip through the sleeve pouch, but it was met with an even greater surprise. Flying ship in the clouds? Good stuff. Martial profound gold dagger? It's really casting pearls before swine in your hands. Major elemental core? So many? What a generous kid. This is evil salt powder. But Luo Xiao seemed to be afraid that something would dirty her hands, so she threw a bag of medicinal powder to the side. She continued to rummage around and found a large pile of scattered items. Finally, she took out a few Taoist books, and her gaze fell on one of them. Tai Golden Book? Luo Xiao was shocked. This was a famous cultivation technique among human body cultivators. According to the legends, after successfully cultivating it, one would be able to melt gold and melt iron at the clear qi stage, transforming qi into swords. If one could cultivate it all the way to the mystic light stage, the profound light that would be emitted from one's body would be comparable to a flying sword magic treasure. This time, Du was here to open his meridians. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he did not lack any books, elixirs, or artifacts. As for this Taoist book, his mother, Du Luo, had used many favors from the Du family to obtain it from an expert. Du regarded this Taoist book that his mother gave him as a treasure and always kept it close to his body. Luo Xiao glanced at Zhang Yan, who had already entered a meditative state, and giggled, saying, "Fellow Zhang, this young master Du sure is generous to you. Even this servant is a bit jealous of fellow Taoist's luck." This is a clear qi cultivation technique that only those with high or middle grade meridians can cultivate. It all depends on whether or not you have this good fortune after opening your meridians. Zhang Yan had already sealed his 5 senses and turned a deaf ear to Luo Xiao's words. The cultivation technique of the mystic origin internal meditation technique was abnormally dangerous. Although he had already familiarized himself with the cultivation technique from the remnant jade, he still did not dare to let his guard down. He carefully guided the flow of qi in his meridians. Once the profound bead was swallowed into his stomach, a cold current first sunk into his dandan. It was as if he had swallowed a 10,000-year profound ice. The blood vessels in his limbs and bones suddenly shrunk, and the cold air rushed straight to his head. Following that, the profound bead released a gust of hot air from his chest to his abdomen, all the way down to his feet. The 2 qi vessels, one yin and one yang, occupied the upper and lower ends of his body. It did not seem like they came from the same source, but more like 2 enemies facing each other. Zhang Yan knew that this was because after the 2 Shell Kings had intercourse, the profound bead that was conceived was not perfect yet. However, it was also the most suitable time for him to swallow it. If he was a step late, the yin and yang would fuse, and the shell would break out of the bead. Then there would be no more hope. The first step of opening his meridians was to carefully guide the 2 qi vessels to merge into one, so that the essence of the profound bead could be used by him. At first, he carefully extracted a strand of the yin and yang qi and slowly merged them together. This was a test of his control over his qi. When the 2 qi vessels converged, the amount that was extracted must be the same, not 1 bit more, not 1 bit less. But not long after, he realized that with the experience of using qi previously, it was extremely easy for him to do this. He simply extracted more than 100 qi vessels in one breath and circulated them in his meridians. Not long after, he completely merged the 2 qi vessels into one and stored them in his abdomen. It was as heavy as mercury. At this point, all the conditions needed before opening his meridians were complete. Next was to circulate his mental cultivation method and use the qi of vitality to envelop the medicinal power of the profound bead. It would travel through his meridians and secret acupoints to break through the various shackles that restricted his body and cut off the shackles that bound his body to the path of immortality. In one stroke, he would create a body suitable for cultivating superior cultivation methods as an immortal. Calming his mind, Zhang Yan circulated the profound origin technique that he was already extremely familiar with and started to circulate it through his meridians. Not long after, he realized that this profound origin internal meditation record was simply tailor-made to refine the profound bead. Every single part of his body, even the most concealed meridians and meridians, were repeatedly cleansed along with the circulation of the technique. The medicinal power contained within the profound bead was not wasted in the slightest and was completely refined by him into every corner of his body. There was not a single place that he didn't take into account. At this moment, he felt his heart beating like a drum, the surging blood in his entire body was like a tidal wave in his ears, every single acupoint was moving vigorously, and the circulating qi beneath his body seemed to want to rush out from under his skin. It was as if there was a hammer constantly hammering on every part of his body, even his joints and tendons were trembling together. He didn't pay attention to these movements and only guarded his mind, wholeheartedly focusing on moving and transporting the profound bead. After the entire technique was smoothly circulated and the qi flowed into every single Dan acupoint, he suddenly felt that his surroundings were quiet. This was a feeling of extreme stillness, as if the heaven and earth hadn't been created, the primordial chaos hadn't been judged, a mysterious state where nothing was born. He was in a trance, forgetting his own world. His mind and consciousness seemed to be faintly discernible. He didn't know how long he had been in this stillness, but suddenly, a spark of inspiration rose in his heart and he asked himself, "Who am I?" Answer, "I am me, I am not me, I am also me, I am still me." Once this realization came out, he heard a clang-clang sound like a sword colliding, and also like a mottled lock that had already rusted and fallen to the ground. Suddenly, as if some kind of restraint had been removed, his entire body suddenly became light. Luo Xiao, who had been guarding Zhang Yan all along, suddenly stood up, her beautiful eyes rippling with extraordinary splendor. She said joyfully, with a profound sound, "The golden lock will automatically fall. Congratulations, fellow Taoist, on becoming a person of my Tao." She looked up again, only to see a chaotic fog appearing from behind Zhang Yan. It was a chaotic mass. It was difficult to distinguish the profoundness. It was boundless and immeasurable. This was the pulse that appeared after Zhang Yan opened his meridians. Luo Xiao was startled. Even with her knowledge, she was puzzled. What kind of pulse was this? The pulse determined a person's attribute after opening his meridians. It was divided into 3 grades: high, middle, and low. The low-grade pulse had all kinds of strange attributes, such as wind, cloud, thunder, lightning, flowers, birds, beasts, and insects. The middle-grade pulse was divided into the 5 elements, and the highest-grade pulse only had the 2 attributes of yin and yang. But the pulse that Zhang Yan opened was a cloud of gas. This seemed to be the fog that only the low-grade pulse had. Could it be low-grade? Impossible. Luo Xiao shook her head. If one were to say that the pulse opened by combining the wonderful record of Xinyuan and the bead was low-grade, she would definitely not believe it. A thought appeared in her mind. Could it be that the pulse that Zhang Yan opened was already above the high grade? This thought made her unconsciously jump in fright. Even though the people in the profound sect used all methods to condense their own pulse and step into the high grade, but this not only depended on the effect of the jade elixir essence pool and the superior method of opening the pulse, it also depended on one's own luck and comprehension. To be able to open a high-grade pulse was already rare. Like Zheng Sun, who opened a low-grade pulse, it was already considered to have a boundless future. High and middle grade were few and far between, and high grade were only heard of in rumors, but those who had such an encounter were all people with illustrious prestige in the profound sect. And this was not without reason. The higher the grade of the pulse, the more techniques that could be practiced. Although those low-grade pulse were unique and strange, it also meant that they had fewer choices of techniques to practice, so it was undoubtedly very difficult to find a suitable technique for themselves. If Zhang Yan's pulse jumped above the high grade, Luo Xiao's gaze also revealed a bit of complexity. She really could not imagine what kind of achievements this person would have in the end. For the first time, she was wavering on whether she should remove the blood essence oath or not. At this moment, there was another movement on Zhang Yan's side. The chaotic cloud-like phenomenon withdrew into the depths of his eyebrows, finally condensing there into a faint vertical mark. Seeing Luo Xiao, she was at a loss again. The pulse was the manifestation of the weak qi in the qi meridian. How could it condense into a substantial appearance? She suddenly felt that everything she knew was not enough to see through the various inconceivable things that had happened to this person at this moment. Zhang Yan's eyes opened, and in that instant, a bright light burst out and actually flashed through the entire cave. He stood up and felt that his entire body was incomparably light, and every movement he made was as light as a feather. Everything was different, as if he had changed into a different body. In reality, he could no longer be called a person now. Once his immortal meridians were opened, he had already taken half a step into the ranks of the immortal Tao cultivators. After returning to the Azure Parasol Mountain, he would ask a guru to evaluate his pulse, and then he would be able to enter the upper academy to practice in even more superior Tao formula. Chapter 32. Fellow Zhang, since your celestial meridian has been opened, we can leave. Luo Xiao tilted her head to listen to the movements outside and found that no one came over. It was obvious that she could take this opportunity to leave without a sound. However, Zhang Yan shook his head slowly and firmly and said, "We cannot leave yet." Luo Xiao was startled and said, "Why?" Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn and he said in a deep voice, "Do you fail to open his meridian this time? When he returns, he will definitely find the culprit. If he finds out that I succeeded in opening my meridian, he will definitely be suspicious. If he investigates carefully, he might be exposed. So," his voice became extremely cold, "I must kill everyone here." His words were filled with murderous intent and Luo Xiao felt a chill in her heart. However, after thinking about it, she felt that what Zhang Yan said was unrealistic. She sighed and advised, "Fellow Zhang, even though your worries are not without reason, this move is too uncertain. Let's not talk about Du Bo, just the 10 strong men by his side and 2 clear qi cultivators are not people the two of us can fight against." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, "What if it's only Du Bo?" Luo Xiao was startled and she frowned and thought for a while before saying, "If it's only Du Bo, he is already exhausted right now and I don't know how much battle power he has left. However, if we can waste him for another 2 days, I might be able to fight with the 2 new talismans in my hands. It's a pity that there are 12 people helping from the side." She shook her head and felt that there was little hope. Zhang Yan heard this and smiled. He clapped his hands lightly and said, "In my eyes, these 12 people are nothing to worry about." Luo Xiao sighed softly and said to Zhang Yan sternly, "Even though fellow Taoist has cut down the golden locks and opened the meridian, these 12 people are not just any ordinary people. How can you kill them just because you want to? Especially the 2 clear qi cultivators, their cultivation is above fellow Taoists. We have no chance of winning." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, don't be impatient. I have a plan. We don't need to do anything. We can just borrow Du Bo's hand to kill these 12 people." Luo Xiao did not believe him at all. However, when she saw Zhang Yan's confident smile, she could not help but say, "Tell me about it." "Zhang Yan, fellow Taoist, lean your ear over." Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes glared at him. She stroked her hair and moved her ear closer to Zhang Yan's face. Zhang Yan's eyes were filled with confidence. "Taoist, Taoist, Luo and Du Bo, and Zhang Yan, Taoist, Zhang, Luo, Yan, Taoist, Su, Taoist, and..." However, Zhang Yan was full of confidence and said, "Fellow Taoist, just do as I say. There won't be any mistakes." Luo Xiao saw Zhang Yan's confident look and bit her lips. She stomped her feet and said, "I'll believe you this once. At most, I'll be buried with fellow Taoist. We'll just be Mandarin ducks." Zhang Yan smiled. "In the past, fellow Taoist Luo called me fellow Taoist. But now, you're saying it with sincerity." Luo Xiao could not help but roll her eyes at him. Zhang Yan said with a relaxed expression, "Even though Mandarin ducks are good, how can it compare to the carefree life of immortals? Fellow Taoist, don't worry. How can I harm myself?" Luo Xiao snorted and walked to Du Yu's side. She opened the locked qi channels in his body one by one. Then, with her back facing him, she placed a golden dagger on his neck. After sleeping for 2 days, Du Yu finally woke up. Just as he opened his eyes, he suddenly quivered. It was obvious that he was aware of the situation he was in. With the golden dagger at his throat and unable to see the other person's face, his body immediately trembled like a sieve. He said in fear, "I'm a disciple of the Du clan in Helen. I wonder who you are. We can talk it over. If you have any requests, my Du clan will be able to satisfy you." Luo Xiao said coldly, "Oh, satisfy you? Then let me ask you, is there any secret method passed down to open meridians in the Du clan?" Du Yu's body trembled and he could not help but hesitate. Even though the secret method passed down was not the method of opening meridians, it was taught by the elders in the clan. It could make the opening of meridians smoother. These secret methods were the foundation of a clan's standing in the world. Outsiders were not allowed to know about them. Luo Xiao saw that he did not speak. She moved the golden dagger in her hand to his neck. Blood immediately flowed out. Du was shocked. After all, he was only a youth and had never experienced such a situation. He still wanted to live forever. How could he be willing to lose his life for no reason? He hurriedly said, "Don't move, don't move. I'm willing to speak, I'm willing to speak. If what you said is false, you know the consequences." Du did not dare to be dishonest. He immediately spilled out everything he knew in full detail, like beans pouring out of a bamboo tube. Luo Xiao followed Zhang Yan's instructions and asked many questions. Du was not sure what the other party's goal was. As he did not know the other party's identity, he did not dare to lie. When she was almost done asking, Luo Xiao slapped Du unconscious again. She turned to look at Zhang Yan, as if asking for his opinion. "It seems that this person is afraid of death and has a weak will. We can use him." Seeing Du Yu's performance, Zhang Yan felt that his chances of winning had increased. He narrowed his eyes and said, "If that's the case, let's see how long Du Bo can endure." 2 days later, Du Bo took out the last bottle of elixirs from his sleeve and poured them all into his mouth. The slightly dim blue light around his body rose again. He did not sleep or rest for 4 days, but the Shell King was still charging left and right, as if his strength would never be exhausted. Du Bo did not dare to relax. Once the Shell King escaped, it would definitely interfere with Du Yu's refinement of the Xian bead. Going berserk was a small matter, but his life would be in danger. He was the only one left fighting with the Shell King. Although the 10 strong men could take turns to rest, they could not persevere like him. All of them were floating and looked dispirited. The 2 clear Qi stage disciples had the elixirs to nourish them and were slightly better, but they did not seem to be able to hold on for long. He originally estimated that Du would only need 3 days to absorb the Xian bead, but it was already the 4th day and there was still no movement. This made Du Bo feel slightly uneasy. When the time came, he could no longer hold it in and asked loudly, "Nephew, are you all right?" Not long after, a mournful voice came from inside, "Uncle Bo, I only feel that my cheeks are burning and my legs are stiff. I don't know why." Hearing Du speak, Du Bo slightly breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he frowned and said, "Nephew, this should be because the effect of the mysterious bead is too strong, causing the qi to be unable to go down. The weak qi is blocked by water, and the heart fire is rushing up. Chanting your Du family's qi-lowering technique will do." "Strange, did your mother not tell you before?" After a while, Du Yu's voice came, "Mother did mention it before, but I did not take it to heart at that time. I only vaguely remember some of it, and I don't know if it's right or wrong." He then recited the incantation loudly, but halfway through, he became intermittent, as if he could not remember it anymore. Du Bo was silent for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Nephew, don't be anxious. Uncle Bo will tell you another incantation. It's a secret incantation passed down by your father. You must remember, do not hear a single word wrongly." Word by word, he recited the mental cultivation method that was supposed to be kept a secret. The 2 clear Qi stage disciples were standing at the side. At this moment, one of them seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed. Suddenly, he went crazy and stopped suppressing the Shell King. Instead, he turned around and ran towards the exit of the cave. But before he could run 2 steps, he saw a ray of blue light catching up to him in the blink of an eye. It pierced through his chest and took his life. The rest of the people had different expressions. Some did not understand, some were bewildered, and some were terrified. But it seemed that they were all thinking about it. Du Bo sighed in his heart, "Originally, I wanted to let you guys go for now and wait until I see nephew, then it won't be too late to deal with it. But now, forget it, killing 1 person is killing 10 people is also killing, why not kill all of you?" His gaze sharpened, and the blue light on his body suddenly retracted and released. The surrounding people only felt that their breathing stagnated, and they felt as if their heads were slapped by something. After a series of screams, these people's heads all burst open, and they fell to the ground dead. The 2 struggling Shell Kings suddenly felt the pressure on them loosen. Just as they were about to flop up, the blue light circled back and pinned them to the ground again. Du Bo's chest rose and fell violently as he panted heavily. It was obvious that this action consumed a lot of his energy, and after losing the help of everyone, it was even more strenuous for him to suppress the Shell Kings. If this continued, his foundation would probably be damaged. He couldn't help but ask, "Nephew, do you remember the incantation clearly? You didn't say anything." "Nephew?" Du Bo asked again. After waiting for a while, just when he was feeling a little irritated, you finally spoke again. "Uncle Bo, I still have one part of the medicinal effect that has not been refined." Du Bo suppressed the blood rising up his throat, thought for a while, and said bitterly, "Just one more day, we can't delay any longer." "One day is too short, Uncle Bo. Just wait patiently, at most 2 more days will be enough." Hearing that Du Yu was actually bargaining without any discussion, Du Bo almost vomited blood. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that he had to use elixirs to recuperate for 2 to 3 years to recover his vitality. At this moment, in the cave dwelling, Luo Xiao heard the screams outside, and when she confirmed that those people were really killed by Du Bo, she said in disbelief, "Is it really so?" Zhang Yan, however, looked like he had already expected the result. He shook his sleeves and said, "It will definitely be so." Passing on mental cultivation techniques was the foundation of a clan's prosperity. Zhang Yan knew that those strong men and clear Qi stage disciples also knew that the cultivation technique should not be passed to 6 ears. Today, he wanted to borrow Du Yu's mouth to say it, and deliberately let these people hear it. The most crucial point was that these people couldn't avoid it even if they wanted to, because Du Bo wouldn't allow it. Du Yu originally wanted to borrow the Shell King's True Dew to open his meridians, and the Shen bead was just an unexpected surprise. It should be the possession of the Ing Tsang sect's head. They stole it without asking, and after that, they would definitely try to cover it up and not let this matter leak out. Therefore, all the people around him were on the list to be beheaded. How could Du Bo let these people leave his side? What if they had ulterior motives and talked about this matter to the Ing Tsang sect's disciples outside? Zhang Yan finally said, "What I did was just taking advantage of the situation to make Du Bo do what he wanted to do a step earlier." That being said, he really did force Du Bo to kill these people, and he didn't need to do anything himself. Luo Xiao was surprised and admired. Today, she finally saw Zhang Yan's resourcefulness, and she unconsciously trusted him a little more. She couldn't help but ask, "When are you going to do it?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, and he smiled, "No hurry, let's grind this person a little more." In the next 3 days, whenever Du Bo asked a question, Du would always have a reason to evade. Finally, Du Bo found something wrong. Chapter 33. Over the past few days, Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao had been stalling for time not because they wanted to exhaust Du Bo's strength. Luo Xiao had used the Shell King True Dew in the cave and the major elemental elixir she got from Du Yu to heal herself. Now, she had recovered 40 to 50% of her strength. However, Luo Xiao was also nervous when she was about to face Du Bo. She did not dare to be careless. She thought that once they fought, she would have to use all her treasures to kill Du Bo, otherwise, if Du Bo reacted, he might have other tricks up his sleeves. Her gaze wandered, but when she saw Zhang Yan's calm expression, she couldn't help but feel angry in her heart. She said, "Dian said that Du Bo still has a talisman in his hands. Fellow Taoist Zhang's wisdom is outstanding. Why don't you think of another way to make Du Bo hand over the talisman with both hands?" Originally, she just wanted to use words to provoke Zhang Yan, but she didn't expect Zhang Yan to nod and seriously say, "I've been thinking about this matter for the past 2 days. I have a method, and I can tell it to fellow Taoist." Luo Xiao opened her mouth, but she did not know what to say. Could it be that this person really had a way to deal with it? She walked closer doubtfully and listened to Zhang Yan's whisper. After a while, her beautiful eyes gradually lit up. Although she had not used the plan yet, she already felt that it would work. Zhang Yan suddenly felt that Du Bo's aura outside was unstable, and he turned around to look and couldn't help but smile. "Fellow Taoist Luo, we have to stabilize Du Bo first. I think he won't be able to hold back any longer." Luo Xiao nodded and said loudly, Du Yu is now under our control. If you let go of the Shell King now, we can leave and Du Yu will die." Have you thought about it carefully? Dubo was shocked. At this moment, he really did have such a plan. He heard that Du Yu's mind was clear when he spoke. It did not seem like there was a problem when refining the bead. Instead, it seemed like he was being coerced by someone. However, he could not figure it out. Moreover, his physical strength had been exhausted and he was gradually unable to suppress the Shell King. Just as he was about to give up and get up to investigate, he didn't dare to act rashly after hearing these words. He asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" "Dubo, why do you ask when you already know the answer?" This time, the sect leader allowed you all to use the true Du to open your meridians, which is already a great favor, but you all secretly swallowed the profound bead. How will your Du clan give the sect leader an explanation for this matter? As soon as this sentence came out, it was like seeing a glimmer of light in the fog, and Dubo immediately understood a little. Someone from the sect leader's faction was making things difficult for the Du family. The internal strife between the sects was not something that happened only once or twice. The disciples of the master and disciple lineage had always been hostile to the disciples of the aristocratic families. They were even more resentful of the fact that they could enjoy the benefits of the various sects without fighting. It was very likely that they would do something like secretly attacking the disciples. Especially this time, the Du family made a big fuss about the death of a few true disciples and accused Ning Chongxian of deliberately not helping them. They even united a few families to put pressure on the sect leader. In order to appease the aristocratic families, the sect leader reluctantly agreed to let Du use the Shell King True Du from the lustrous cloud shell field to open his meridians. It could be imagined that this matter would definitely cause the sect leader's faction to be dissatisfied. Especially now that they were in the lustrous cloud shell field, he really couldn't think of anyone other than the sect leader's faction who could enter this place. And the most important thing was that the other party was a female cultivator. Everyone knew that the sect leader had always favored using female cultivators. Not only could he use the method of marriage to rope in various talented disciples, but he also didn't have so many scruples when doing things, so he believed 80% of the other party's identity. He pondered for a while and felt that no matter what, this matter couldn't be used as an excuse by the sect leader to suppress the Du family. It seemed that he could only take responsibility for this matter. He sighed secretly and said, "Sir, please understand, this matter is all Dubo's idea. Du is young and ignorant, so he misunderstood my nonsense. This has nothing to do with the Du family, and Dubo isn't a member of the Du family, it's just that." Before he finished speaking, he was rudely interrupted by the other party. "Humph, do you think it's important to me whether you're a member of the Du family or not?" What a joke! Dubo frowned. It seemed that the other party didn't want to let it go. He couldn't help but feel angry in his heart, and his voice turned cold. "If that's the case, what's the point of saying so much? Do you think that I'm so easy to bully? Why don't you come out and meet me, and I will use our own means to determine the winner." Hearing that Dubo's voice seemed to be about to explode, the voice on the other side chuckled and said, "Dubo, to tell you the truth, at this moment in the lustrous cloud shell field, there is more than one person whose cultivation is higher than yours, and Du Yu is in our hands. I advise you not to have any crooked thoughts. If you make a move, we will immediately kill you here, and then capture Du Yu back to the sect. This is exactly what the senior brothers want." Hearing that, Dubo was instantly shocked and fearful. It was possible that there were other Ingtsang sect disciples outside the shell field to receive them, otherwise the other party wouldn't be able to come in. Just as the other party said, if the matter of embezzling the Xian bead was exposed, if he still dared to make a move, it would give the other party a reason to kill him. In addition, in the end, he still wasn't able to protect Du Yu. He was afraid that his clan would be implicated by the Du family's anger, and his death would be in vain. Thinking clearly about the consequences, he immediately dispelled his original idea of fighting with his life, and his tone softened as he said, "What exactly do you want?" The other party's voice sounded unhurriedly. "How you take it depends on Mr. Du's will." Dubo couldn't help but be puzzled. If the other party wanted to harm him, he would have already made a move. Why was he still not making a move? Was it because the other party's cultivation wasn't as good as his, and he didn't have the confidence? That didn't make sense. At most, he could just leave and take Du away, which could also make the Du family lower their head. His thoughts turned and he thought hard. Then, combined with this sentence that had a profound meaning, he finally came to a realization. So this was the other party's purpose. If that was the case, everything could be explained. Thinking of this, he thought that he had already understood the other party's intentions, so he didn't panic. He said, "Can you discuss it with me?" "Speak." Du Bo probed, "You and I are both seeking to become immortals. We come from the same source, so why do we have to fight to the death? Moreover, since the Xian bead has already been swallowed by my nephew, I will give you some benefits. How about you let us go?" The other party was silent, and after a while, he said, "What benefits?" Hearing this, Du Bo was delighted, and his heart was even more certain. He said, "I have used up all the pills here, but I still have a lot of Xian beads. If you let us go, I am willing to give all I have to you. What do you think?" The other party sneered, "Du Bo, you are looking down on us too much. How much is a mere Xian bead's worth?" Du Bo's expression didn't change. "As long as you are willing to bargain, it won't be a problem. I am willing to make a vow that if you let us go, I will definitely repay you generously. Although the vow is good, I am not prepared to meet Mr. Du again in the future. In my opinion, I can only be at ease with what I have in my hands and what I have eaten. As for those things that are too far away, don't mention them." Zhang Yan looked at Luo Xiao with a smile that wasn't a smile. He didn't expect that she would use the exact words that he had forced her to say, which was quite aggressive. As if thinking of the tragic situation that day, Luo Xiao also fiercely stared back at him. Du Bo said again, "Then what do you mean?" Luo Xiao said unhurriedly, "I heard that you have a heart-piercing arrow and a mystic bird shield. These two magic weapons, one for offense and one for defense, complement each other. If you take them out, I can let you and the Du family go." Du Bo became silent, obviously seriously considering the other party's suggestion. Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao weren't in a hurry. In any case, the more they dragged, the better it would be to wear down Du Bo's vitality. They weren't the slightest bit worried that someone from above would come down to check. It should be known that opening meridians with the help of the True Dew and the Jade Elixir Pond took a similar amount of time. At least for the first half a month, no one would come to disturb them. After waiting for a long time, Du Bo slowly opened his mouth and said, "This time, I only brought the mystic bird shield. That heart-piercing arrow had its spirituality damaged when fighting with a great enemy last month, and it hasn't been refined yet." Luo Xiao immediately said, "I didn't come here alone. One mystic bird shield, I'm afraid it won't be enough." These words were very clear. It wasn't that she came here alone, one magic weapon wasn't enough. Du Bo was silent for a while, then sighed and said, "Fine, I have a purple hidden feather robe here. It's woven from Yuqing silk, it can block ordinary magic weapons and flying swords. I was going to give it to my nephew as a congratulatory gift after opening his meridians, how about it?" Luo Xiao was about to open her mouth, but Zhang Yan whispered something at the side. Luo Xiao was startled. He looked at Zhang Yan with a strange expression, coughed and said, "This method is good, but what can I do when I have a companion who doesn't need a magic weapon? It's just that I can't stand your Du family's face. Originally, I only wanted to make Du open his meridians, but I didn't expect this kid to gain such great benefits instead." He was even more furious in his heart and only wanted to vent his anger. He originally wanted to break Du's 4 limbs, but seeing that he's only a youth, he couldn't help but lose his status. He didn't expect Du Bo to actually respond so readily this time, saying, "Why wait for this matter? I can promise you right now." With toots pa poch sounds, he raised his palm and broke his own legs, then asked, "Is that person satisfied?" This wasn't because his mind wasn't clear and he liked to harm himself, it was because this matter was really nothing to him. As a mystic light cultivator, he only needed to use mystic light to control his body and fly. Although there wasn't much mystic light left on his body, if he could sit down and rest for a while, he would be able to reattach his broken legs in less than an hour. However, he didn't expect that he would regret it not long after. "All right, Mr. Du is a trustworthy person. Wipe off the essence blood on the shield and send it over." "Wait, how can I trust you? Mr. Du, I can swear a poison oath to the Emperor Heaven and Earth that if anyone leaks even a little bit of this matter, they will be struck by lightning and burned by the flames of the earth. What do you think? When Du Bo heard this, he felt that the other party was very sincere. Once a cultivator made an oath, it would immediately reveal the cause and effect. There was no room for falsehood, so he immediately agreed. Luo Xiao pointed to the sky and swore very straightforwardly. She wouldn't have leaked this matter in the first place. After the other party made the oath, Du Bo immediately relaxed and took out his magic treasure. He clenched his teeth and wiped off the essence blood on it. He couldn't help but feel his heart ache. He then took out the feather robe and used mystic light to wrap around it. He threw the shield and the feather robe outside the cave. He had also secretly planned to see who this person was, so he had thrown them a little closer to the entrance of the cave. Who would have thought that before they landed on the ground, a streak of black profound light would flash past, catching the mystic bird shield and the feathered robe. He couldn't help but shiver. The other party really was a mystic light cultivator. Then he felt at ease again. It seemed that the other party really didn't have the intention to be ruthless and just wanted to get some benefits. Otherwise, with the other party's cultivation, they could have killed their way in and killed him long ago. Even now, he didn't realize that he was falling into someone else's trap step by step. With the two treasures in their hands, Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao looked at each other and calmed down. Now that the magic treasure was gone, Du Bo was like a tiger without its teeth. His threat was reduced by more than half. The key to this plan was to use his power to pressure others and make Du Bo mistakenly think that they were on the side of the sect master. He couldn't fight them head-on, so he could only seek a compromise. In Zhang Yan's original plan, if Du Bo insisted on refusing, then he could only use the magic treasure in his hand to fight. If that didn't work, it wouldn't be too late to escape with the Luo Xiao mystic light. Of course, this was only the worst-case scenario. From Du Bo's performance on Azure Wu Mountain that day, Zhang Yan felt that this Du Bo wasn't a hot-blooded person who would do anything without a care. This person's personality was more conservative, so he was somewhat confident in this plan. He first got rid of Du Bo's followers, then swindled the other party's magic treasure and made him break his own legs. Now that the other party's shell was gone, and he had lost his claws and teeth, it was the best time to extract his marrow. Zhang Yan stood up and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Luo, if you don't make a move now, when?" Chapter 34. Du Bo, we won't make things difficult for you. We'll leave Du Yu here, and you can take him away. Goodbye. After that, a black light flashed from the depths of the cave, and it seemed that the person had disappeared. Du Bo was slightly relieved when he heard that the other party had fulfilled their promise. However, he still didn't dare to be careless. He carefully listened to the movements outside, but other than a faint breathing sound, there was no other sound. It seemed that they really left. Du Bo's heart relaxed, and his eyes moved to the two shell kings that were suppressed by his black light. He took a deep breath, and his chest swelled up. His breathing also became heavier. With a chag sound, the two shell kings were pulled in front of him. Two palms slapped on their hard shells at the same time. Before they landed on the ground, another black light shot out and wrapped them up before throwing them far away. After doing all this, he seemed to have exhausted all his strength. His hands trembled non-stop, and he barely managed to suppress his surging blood and chi. A blue light rose out of nowhere and carried his body out. The shell of the Shell Kings was hard, and the two palms just now only caused a little shock to their internal organs. They would return soon after they recovered. He didn't have much true essence left, so he had to take Du Yu away as soon as possible. When he flew out of the cave, he saw Du Yu lying on the ground from afar. He couldn't help but be startled. He rushed forward to take a closer look, only to find that although Du Yu was covered in true dew and dirt, he only looked to be in a sorry state. In fact, he wasn't injured at all. He calmed down and thought to himself, in the end, that person didn't dare to offend the Du clan. He slapped away Du Yu's chi meridian that was sealed and was about to take him away. However, when Du Yu woke up and saw Du Bo, he shouted, "Uncle Bo, quick, quick, it's Zhang Yan who took the Shen bead, and he also took my magic treasure. Uncle Bo, quickly take it back." Zhang Yan? Du Bo was shocked. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and a bad feeling welled up in his heart. He said in a deep voice, "Nephew, there's no need to say any more. We'll deal with everything after we get out of here." Just when he was about to fly away, he heard someone say loudly, "Mr. Du, why are you in such a hurry to leave? You'd better stay here obediently." Du Bo looked up and saw a inkstone that was as black as ink appear above his head. At first, it was only the size of a palm, but in the blink of an eye, it had expanded to a radius of 100 feet. It came crashing down toward him with a domineering aura. Soul-shaking inkstone. Du Bo's eyes twitched. He knew that Du Yu took a family treasure with her this time, but he didn't expect it to be this magic treasure. The origin of this inkstone was not simple. It was originally refined by a core formation cultivator from the Du clan called Duda. Once it smashed onto a cultivator's body, it would immediately shake their soul, freeze their true essence, and lock their corporeal body. They would not be able to move at all and could only be smashed to death. The moment this inkstone appeared, there was no doubt that the other party wanted to take his life here. Only now did he realize that everything that happened earlier was all part of Zhang Yan's scheme. For a moment he was both shocked and furious. But now, not only was his true essence exhausted, more than half of the profound light on his body had been consumed. He wasn't afraid of Zhang Yan, but he was worried about the mystic light stage cultivator that was hiding in the dark. Once this person made a move, he felt that it was absolutely impossible to resist. He couldn't be entangled here any longer. The only way out was to rush out of the cave and make plans after returning to the Du clan. Thinking up to here, he flicked his finger and a white light flew out. This was the evil-warding jade pendant that was bestowed by the clan. No matter what kind of magic treasure it was, it would be able to temporarily block it. After the jade pendant flew out, it took the initiative to collide with the treasured inkstone. The inkstone seemed to be held up by something as it slightly paused in the air. But after a moment, the majestic force crushed it into pieces with a kachit sound, and the inkstone's momentum didn't reduce as it continued to descend. However, this block had already bought time for Du Bo, and seizing this slight gap, a blue-colored streak wrapped around him and Du Yu as they swiftly flew out of the cave. Luo Xiao, who hid within the cave wall, couldn't help but be anxious when she saw this. Although the might of the Soul Shaker inkstone was enormous, it wasn't easy to maneuver. She was still unable to completely control it with her strength, so she was unable to stop for a moment. Thus, she could only shout out loudly, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you must not let him escape." Just as the two of them were about to fly out of the cave, an azure light chased after them from behind. Du Bo suddenly felt a chill run down his spine, and he cried out in his heart, "Shit." He barely managed to tilt his body and avoid being hit in a vital spot. The azure light pierced through the left side of his chest, then took advantage of the momentum to turn and cut off one of Du Yu's arms, causing the latter to instantly emit a shrill cry that shook the heavens. Du Bo let out a muffled groan as his figure became sluggish in the air, and the profound light on his body flickered indeterminately like a candle in the wind, seeming as if it would be extinguished at any moment. The azure light circled half a circle in the air before circling back once more, and this time it flew towards his head. Wishful Spirit Shuttle. Du Bo couldn't help but smile bitterly. He was well aware of the power of the Wishful Spirit Shuttle. Even if he was at his peak, it wouldn't be easy to deal with it, so how could he dare to resist it head-on at this time? Helpless, he could only retreat back into the cave. Luo Xiao couldn't help but be overjoyed when she saw Du Bo was blocked. She reminded, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, although the Wishful Spirit Shuttle is powerful, this person has condensed his Yuanjin and profound light together. As long as the profound light doesn't dissipate and his head isn't cut off, his life is not in danger. You must not be careless." Zhang Yan, who was standing behind the cave wall, smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. It's just a cornered beast struggle." Luo Xiao made a hand sign and shouted loudly. The soul-shaking inkstone fell again. This time Du Bo was unable to avoid it. He shouted loudly and the muscles under his clothes were faintly visible. He raised his shoulders and took the initiative to block the inkstone. The originally vast, profound light suddenly shrank and condensed into the size of a palm with a twatch sound to protect that area. Bang! The Soul Shaker inkstone smashed right on Dubo's shoulder, but unexpectedly, his profound light was condensed. It seemed to be a thin layer, but it was as flexible as water. It actually protected his shoulder from the beginning and took this blow, causing the Soul Shaker inkstone to not be able to directly come into contact with his body. He didn't make a sound and knelt on the ground. He fiercely straightened his back and unexpectedly pushed the inkstone up a little. Luo Xiao let out a sound of surprise, but she was not surprised. Dubo seemed to be tough and unyielding, but in fact, he was already a tiger in a cage, a flood dragon in shallow water. Even if he could hold on for a while, it was just a last-ditch struggle. She thought to herself, if so, I need to add another fire to send you on your way earlier. She waved her hand and another treasure was thrown into the air. This was a cloud pattern vermilion brush that was about a foot long. The body of the brush was full, and the brush shaft was painted with golden lacquer. Once it was in the air, the tip of the brush moved up and down like a person nodding his head, and a chi activity instantly enveloped Dubo, announcing Destiny Brush. Dubo cried out involuntarily. At this time, he hated Du Luo for spoiling her son too deeply, so much so that she even asked for this treasure to be given to Du Yu, but she did not tell him about it. Now, he had to bear the bitter fruit. At this moment of life and death, he could only fight to the death. With a shake of his wrist, a small silver arrow slipped into his palm, and with a raise of his hand, he threw it towards Luo Xiao. This small arrow arrived in front of Luo Xiao in the blink of an eye, and she couldn't help but change her expression. However, just when this small arrow was about to reach her body, a shield that looked like a bird spreading its wings suddenly flew out and stood in front of her. With a dang sound, the arrow and the shield fell to the ground at the same time. Mystic Bird Shield? Seeing that the other party used his treasure to block the attack that he was determined to kill, Dubo was so angry that his vision turned black. The blood that gushed up his throat could no longer be suppressed, and it spurted out from his mouth. At this time, the announcing Destiny brush had already circled around his body, and the blue mysterious light on his body was suddenly shaved off a layer. After circling again, it dimmed a little. Seeing that the mysterious light was gradually thinning, his expression suddenly changed. Now, his body was like a broken shell, and only the trace of Yuan Zhen that he tried to squeeze out from the orifice of his dantian was still holding on. He knew that he could not escape today no matter what. Thinking of this, he immediately made a decision. With a sigh, he stretched out his hand and put it on Du Yu's shoulder, and said to himself, I only hope that your mother can understand my painstaking efforts. He stretched out his hand, and most of the mysterious light that was originally surrounding his body moved to Du Yu. Then, with a flash of light, it actually wrapped around Du Yu and flew out. After doing this, blood oozed out of Dubo's 5 orifices. He had completely given up resisting, but as long as he could save Du Yu's life, his family could also be saved. He could only hope that the Du clan would avenge him after knowing the truth. As the announcing Destiny brush circled in the air again, the last remaining layer of mysterious light on Dubo's body was also shaved off. At this time, the soul-shaking inkstone pressed down without any resistance, and with a bang, Dubo's whole body was smashed into pieces. Not even a trace of Yuan Zhen could escape. Du originally thought that he had escaped after being sent away by the mysterious light, but he did not expect that the divine Rui shuttle would catch up and pierce through his chest and abdomen. He let out a cry, and blood spurted out wildly as he fell from the air. Seeing that the divine Rui shuttle circled in the air for a while, as if it was going to fall again, Du's eyes were filled with fear, and he shouted, Zhang Yan, if you kill me, my Du clan will definitely destroy your spirit and soul. If you let me go today, I will definitely report to the sect master. He will honor you as the eldest disciple of the lower house, and you can take any magic treasures or pills you want. Zhang Yan ignored his nonsense, and with a spell, the divine Rui shuttle flashed through Duyu's neck as if it was cutting through soft mud. A big head rolled down, and with another circle, it chopped the floating Yuan Zhen into pieces. At this point, Du Yu and Du Bo no longer existed in this world. With the great enemy eliminated, Zhang Yan could not help but feel relieved. With the death of these two, there would not be a third person in the world who would know that he had swallowed the mysterious bead, and from then on, he could return to the sect with peace of mind. He slowly let out a breath, looked at the corpses at his feet, and turned to Luo Xiao, who had walked out of the cave wall, and asked, "Fellow Taoist Luo, is there a way to dispose of these two corpses without leaving a trace?" Luo Xiao thought for a moment, and her eyes lit up. She clapped her hands and said, "There is a way." She took 2 quick steps forward and picked up a bag of medicinal powder from the ground. Holding it in her hand, she said, "This is evil salt powder. Just a little is enough to corrode and pierce through metal and stone, and it's the most suitable to use to destroy corpses. In this way, we can dissolve the corpses of Du Yu and Du Da, but we can leave the corpses of those 12 people." Luo Xiao covered her mouth and chuckled. Fellow Taoist Zhang's method is to make Du Bo bear a bad name even after his death. Zhang Yan lightly smiled, and just when he was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed as he felt a faint throbbing in the world, and his gaze couldn't help but focus as he said in a low voice, "The lightning tribulation is coming." Chapter 35. The record of internal meditation of Xianyuan was the supreme method of opening meridians. It was an orthodox ancient Xianmen, but those who succeeded would easily incur the jealousy of the heavens. After succeeding, a lightning tribulation would descend. It would not harm the body, the soul, the heart, or the mind, but it would cause the sound of thunder and the 5 elements to injure the tribulation. It would shake the cultivator's foundation and block the path to heaven. Those who could not avoid it in time would have all their previous efforts wasted. Not to mention the fact that all their hard work would be wasted, they would no longer have any hope of cultivating Tao. However, the heaven and earth were mysterious, there would naturally be a chance of survival. Before the lightning tribulation, there would be signs. If the tribulation taker had a way to deal with it, he would be able to avoid the tribulation in time and achieve Xianmen cultivation. Zhang Yan had received the secret from Luo Xiao beforehand. Now that the heaven and earth had changed, he had sensed it in advance. He knew that the lightning tribulation was coming soon and would destroy his Tao foundation. "Fellow Taoist, please avoid it quickly." Luo Xiao's expression turned cold. She and Zhang Yan had a blood oath. If one of them died, they would die together. Once Zhang Yan's cultivation was destroyed, there would be no hope of immortality in this life. How could she tolerate it when she only had a short life of 100 years? Therefore, with the lightning tribulation approaching, she could not help but feel anxious. The black light on her body swept across the ground a few times and immediately dug a shallow pit under the cave, just enough for one person to lie in. Zhang Yan no longer hesitated. He used Yuan Zhen to seal his facial features and closed his senses. Luo Xiao quickly used gravel and soil to bury him. After everything was settled, there was a sudden rumble of thunder in the sky. Luo Xiao's heart shuddered when she heard it. The thunder was grand and majestic. It was completely different from normal thunder. Furthermore, the thunder actually penetrated through the layers of the cave and went straight into the cave. It was as if it was ringing right beside her ears. Fortunately, it was only a huge commotion. There was no lightning and fire. Even so, as a demon cultivator, Luo Xiao instinctively felt a sense of fear towards the thunder. Only then did she remember why the 2 Shell Kings were nowhere to be seen. They must have also sensed the lightning tribulation and found a place to hide. Even she felt a little uneasy about the terrifying thunder, let alone the 2 uncivilized Meng demons. 7 days later, the thunder finally subsided. Without waiting for Luo Xiao to dig up the soil, Zhang Yan leaped up from the ground. At this moment, he suddenly felt his body become light, as if a person who was originally carrying a heavy load had put down a heavy burden. In the depths of his body, there was even a different kind of qi activity growing, like the power of growth when all living things were germinating. It was unstoppable, and it broke out along with him. At this moment, his cultivation could be considered to have attained perfection, and he'd crossed the first door of the Grand Tao. At this moment, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to take a look. He saw that the two Shell Kings had flown back unknowingly and were lying at the entrance of the cave, letting out a sad cry. It was obvious that they knew that the profound bead had been lost. However, they had fought with Dubo for a long time and were not completely unharmed. After losing the profound bead and being frightened by the lightning tribulation, they were already dispirited and listless. Luo Zhao's beautiful eyes turned and she said, "Fellow Zhang, why don't we take this opportunity to take these two Shell Kings and find another spiritual place to settle down? After a year or two, there will be another shell field, and maybe we can condense another shell profound bead." However, Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "That's not appropriate. The Yin shell originally belonged to the head of the Yutzong sect. If I take it, not only the Du clan, even the Yutzong sect will investigate this matter. The implications are too great, it's better to stop here, but..." He paused and said, "The passage made by this Yang shell is too conspicuous. When the Du clan and the Yutzong sect come to investigate, they will definitely find out. Not only will the shell field at the side not be safe, even the matter of the profound bead may be found out. We need to find a safe way." From his point of view, he wanted to create the illusion that Du Bo killed someone at the scene, but the specific reason naturally didn't need to be understood by the people investigating, so they could worry about it. If the matter of the profound bead was leaked, it would be hard to avoid a target direction, and the scope would be reduced by a lot, which would be disadvantageous to himself. Therefore, not only did he have to think of a way to take away the Yang shell, he also couldn't leave behind all the spirit shells in the shell field at the side. This matter is simple. The Yang shell is not like the Yin shell, it likes to move its nest, so we just need to find another place to settle down. From Luo Zhao's point of view, condensing a profound bead was rarely seen in 100 years. If she took away the Yang shell, no one would be able to associate it with this matter. As for those spirit shells, she now had the Qiankuan sleeve pouch, so she didn't have to worry about trouble moving around. The good thing about this matter was that those 12 people were killed by Du Bo himself, so no matter what, he would be the first suspect of the Du clan and the Yutzong sect. However, this person was already dead, and cultivators who had opened their meridians were already half a step into the gate of immortality, so his location couldn't be found by relying on the technique of deduction. Therefore, this matter would most likely be left unsettled in the end. As for Zhang Yan, with his strength, there was no way he would be able to associate it with him. If someone said that this matter was done by a cultivator who had yet to open his meridians, he would only be seen as a joke by others. After the discussion, the two of them immediately swept away all the spirit shells at the location of the Yang shell. There were no less than 40 to 50,000 spirit shells, and it was impossible to fit them all in one Qiankuan sleeve pouch. Luo Zhao had to go back and forth several times before it was properly taken care of. As for the Yang shell, she took advantage of the moment when it was weak and powerless to find another cave thousands of miles away to settle it down. However, the Shell King was good at moving underground, so it couldn't be kept for long. Therefore, she took a strand of blood essence in her hand, so no matter where the shell went the next day, she would be able to find it with the guidance of the blood essence. This was only to prevent the Yang shell from finding the Yin shell again. After everything was settled, Zhang Yan still couldn't immediately return to the mountain gate. To him, there was still an important thing to do, and that was to find a suitable reason to explain his opening of meridians. The jade elixir essence pool of the world was either held in the hands of the large sects, or it was hidden in the various Xianmen aristocratic families. Opening of meridians couldn't be separated from the jade elixir essence pool. In the eyes of the elders and fellow disciples, Zhang Yan wasn't born in an aristocratic family, so how could he succeed in opening his meridians just by going down the mountain? The method could be explained as it was bestowed by the master. Others couldn't cultivate it, but he could do it without any hindrance. Others couldn't say anything, and could only say that this was his opportunity. However, no matter what, he couldn't avoid the jade elixir essence pool. He had to find a safe way to plug this loophole so that others wouldn't be able to see through it. However, Zhang Yan already had a plan in mind for this matter. After Princess Linya Chaoying delivered 1,000 pounds of divine sand, She said that the disciple from the North Star sect who used to pester her heard that Chowing had made contact with Zhang Yan, changed his attitude and became extremely courteous to her. He even went to ask Chowing to let him meet with Zhang Yan if there was a chance. The North Star sect belonged to the bottom of the second-rate sects, and naturally couldn't compare to a colossus like the Yinsong sect. However, to be able to occupy a paradise and establish a sect, they should have some foundation. Zhang Yan planned to start with this person. Moreover, since this person was so eager to make contact with him, he must have some other request. If Zhang Yan asked him to find a jade elixir essence pool, he wouldn't dare to refuse. After opening his meridians, Zhang Yan wasn't in a hurry. Moreover, Luo Xiao was a demon cultivator, and it was easy for people with ulterior motives to spy on him if he rode on the mystic light during the day. Therefore, he simply stayed in a nearby county and sent someone to deliver a letter to the residence of Princess Linya Chaoying. A few days later, the disciple of the North Star sect hurried over. This person was called Yan Jinping. He was about 34 or 35 years old, with a short beard on his chin. He wore a crimson robe with crane patterns, a turban on his head, and a pair of black boots. He didn't look like a cultivator, but more like a noble court official. As soon as he saw Zhang Yan, he had a fawning expression. When Zhang Yan mentioned the purpose of his visit, he didn't even ask for the reason and said without thinking, "Under my North Star sect, there are a few declining aristocratic families with jade elixir essence pools in Yongtong County. Senior brother and I will find a few of them." Zhang Yan said lightly, "There's no need for too many people." Yan Jinping was quick-witted and immediately understood, saying, "I will definitely satisfy senior brother." About 10 days later, Yan Jinping brought a middle-aged man who looked like an old farmer to see Zhang Yan. He was a very perceptive person and knew what he shouldn't hear or ask. After bringing the person, he took the initiative to leave. Seeing that he was so tactful, Zhang Yan secretly nodded and felt that this person was useful. "I am a disciple of the lower house of the Yinsong sect. I need to borrow your clan's jade elixir essence pool." As soon as Zhang Yan revealed his identity, the middle-aged man was shocked at first, but then his expression became even more respectful. However, a hint of nervousness could be seen in his expression. He said, "Since the celestial master wants to borrow it, I dare not comply. Just take it but..." Before coming, Yan Jinping had already explained that this was an important guest from a large sect, but he didn't expect it to be from the Yinsong sect. The Yinsong sect was one of the 16 major sects in Donghua continent, and this person was a disciple of the lower house. He might even be a direct descendant of some Xianmen aristocratic family. In the future, he would be the backbone of a sect with a blessed place. How could he dare to offend him? Even the North Star sect could destroy his entire clan with a flip of his hand. Seeing him hesitate, Zhang Yan asked again, "What's the problem?" The middle-aged man didn't dare to raise his head, and said in a low voice, "My Han clan has produced many great cultivators in the early years. One of my ancestors even broke through the void and left behind a first-class essence pool. But in the past 100 years, there hasn't been a single essence-building cultivator in the clan. In my generation, it has fallen to the 4th class. I don't know if this is in line with the Celestial Master's intentions?" Zhang Yan didn't care and said, "It doesn't matter, as long as it can be used. This time I'll borrow your clan's jade elixir essence pool. If you have any requests, I can help you once." The stone embryo in the jade elixir essence pool needed 100 years, or even 1,000 years of cultivation before it could be upgraded step by step. This person said that it had been sealed for 100 years, but it had only fallen to the 4th class. If it was true, then the original first-class essence pool should be correct. But he didn't care about this. This time he just wanted to set up a cover to explain the reason why he opened his meridians. The middle-aged man hesitated a few times, and finally plucked up his courage and said, "If there is a disciple in my clan who is suitable to cultivate in the future, I hope the Celestial Master can help me." After he finished speaking, he couldn't help but feel nervous in his heart. He didn't know if the other party would be angry because of this. Zhang Yan looked at the other party. This person was quite smart. If he was successful in his cultivation in the future, and this person had a disciple in his clan who was suitable to cultivate in the Tao. He only needed to help him and he could enter the Yutsong sect to cultivate. It could be said that he had reached the heavens in a single bound. This was a good deal. Good. Zhang Yan immediately agreed. I'll allow you to use 260 years to guide one of your clan's disciples into the sect. As for how good his luck is, it will depend on him. The middle-aged man was overjoyed. He solemnly bowed and said, "Thank you, immortal master." After he got up, he said, "I ask the celestial master to move. This jade elixir essence pool is in the Yin Luo Mountains. It's only a 2-day journey from here." Chapter 36. Over the past few months, there was a shocking piece of news on Mount Kangwu. It was said that Du Yu, the disciple of the Du clan of Helen, borrowed the Pearl King's true dew to open his meridians, but was killed by Du Bo and robbed of his treasure. Du Bo's whereabouts were unknown, and it was likely that he was already dead. Although the Du clan tried their best to cover up this matter, how could they hide it from the eyes and ears of the Xianmen aristocratic families? Everyone in the lower house was gloating. The Du clan had always been arrogant, and this time, they did not follow the rules and forcefully took away the position of the eldest disciple. They deserved this. Now that the Du clan's previous arrangements were all in vain, it was impossible for them to interfere in the lower house. After a series of maneuvers by the Lin clan, Lin Yuan became the eldest disciple as he wished. Just as he was feeling complacent, Zhang Yan, who he thought was chased off the mountain by Du Yu, returned to the mountain. At first, he did not take it to heart. It was strange that Zhang Yan did not return after the Du clan's death. However, there was another shocking news. After not seeing each other for 2 months, Zhang Yan had already cut off the golden locks, opened his meridians, and stepped into the great path of Heavenly Gate. This was even more shocking than Du Yu's disappearance. When Lin Yuan heard about this, he sat there for a long time. The joy in his heart disappeared, and what replaced it was a bad mood. He had worked hard to become the eldest disciple of the lower house, but Zhang Yan, who he thought he had to get rid of, had actually surpassed him? Wouldn't he, the eldest disciple, become a joke? For the first time in his life, Lin Yuan hated the rules of the family. If he did not have to sit in the lower house for 16 years, he could have opened his meridians and entered the upper house. How could he have fallen behind Zhang Yan? This news made many of the lower house aristocratic family's disciples unable to react, and the Mount Kangwu was silent. How many years had it been? Zhang Yan had only been on the mountain for 3 years, and it had only been half a year since he became an inner disciple. How could he have opened his meridians in 2 months? Didn't they say that Zhang Yan's aptitude was average and that he could only be a strong man? On the contrary, Du, who swore to take Zhang Yan's life, went missing after opening his meridians. There was a strong contrast between the two. Haojue Peak, Duzhen Hall. When Zhang Yan stepped into the hall again, Shi Shoujing, He Shouxuan, and Zhen Shouzhong did not dare to sit on the stone platform. They all stood up and bowed. The position of the lower house guru had always been held by those in the sect who had not made much progress in the path of cultivation. This was why they could guard their loneliness and face the common people day and night. As for those who had opened their meridians in the lower house, once they entered the upper house, they would become the backbone of the sect and become true disciples. They would be bestowed with paradises, elixirs, and dharma books. In the future, their path of cultivation would be smooth, and their future prospects would far surpass the 3 of them. As such, they did not respect the current Zhang Yan, but his future achievements. Greetings to the 3 masters. Although he had successfully opened his meridian channels, Zhang Yan's actions did not show the slightest hint of arrogance. He was still as respectful and courteous as before. No matter how the 3 of them treated him, or what thoughts they had in their hearts that day, they had indeed accepted him into the lower courtyard. Therefore, he did not respect the status of the 3 of them, but rather the fact that they had helped him earlier. Shi Shoujing saw that Zhang Yan's current attitude was respectful and had a good impression of him. The 3 of them looked impressive, but in reality, they did not have much power. They could only rely on their cultivation to suppress the disciples of the lower courtyard. Usually, They only thought about how to protect themselves, and occasionally used the sex rules to discipline the disciples of the lower courtyard. But now that Zhang Yan had opened his celestial meridians, the rules of the lower courtyard were already useless against him. He no longer had to care about them, but he still behaved in such a manner. Shi Shoujing could not help but say in a friendly manner, "Junior brother Zhang, now that you have opened your meridians and broken through, you will be one of us from now on. You can call each other brothers." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and cupped his hands again. "Greetings, senior brothers." The three of them returned the greeting again. After straightening up, Shi Shoujing carefully examined Zhang Yan. He saw that his breath was coming out of his head, and the power of growth was about to move. It was obvious that after opening his celestial meridians, it was a sign of success. He could not help but sigh in his heart. When he first heard that Zhang Yan had opened his celestial meridians, he had thought it was a mistake. Now it seemed that he had misjudged people. No wonder the Zhou family had chosen him as their son-in-law. It seemed that there was a reason behind it. He had also read the record of inner meditation of Xin Yuan, and he knew the dangers within. Because this book was too complicated and mysterious, with thousands of threads, it was also called the Thousand Light Book in Shenmen. He thought that if it were him, he would definitely not dare to take this step. And this Zhang Yan looked like his talent was average. He had already hinted to him that the path of a strong man was the most appropriate. He did not think that after not seeing him for a few months, this person would actually open his celestial meridians and break through, and go straight to the gate of heaven. If this person did not have a great opportunity on him, then there was an expert guiding him from behind. No matter which one it was not something he could speculate on. Thinking of this, Shi Shoujing's expression became even more polite. He said, "Junior brother, please wait a moment. The senior brother from the upper house will be here shortly." Half a month ago, Zhang Yan had returned to the mountain. Originally, once the news of him opening his celestial meridians had spread, the celestial master from the upper house should have arrived immediately. However, for some reason he had not arrived. It was only today that the confirmed news came, and only then did he summon Zhang Yan. The four of them waited for about an hour before a middle-aged Taoist wearing a feathered robe and a tall hat finally arrived. He walked into the main hall with a sullen face and greeted the three deacons of the lower house who had the word "Shou" written on them. After seeing this person, Shi Shoujing was slightly surprised, but he did not show it on his face. As usual, he cupped his hands and bowed to this Taoist. This Taoist turned around and stood in the main hall with his hands behind his back. He looked up and down at Zhang Yan, and said with a frown, "You are Zhang Yan? Quickly release your pulse and let I have a look." Zhang Yan squinted his eyes, but did not move. "What, you don't know how?" The Taoist's face was rather impatient. He said, "Shift the flow of qi, let the primordial qi enter the meridians, circulate it through the orifices, and naturally manifest it." Zhang Yan still did not move, and only asked lightly, "Who is respect?" "You," the Taoist suddenly choked, and could not speak for a long time. He wanted to open his mouth to teach Zhang Yan a few words, but he was afraid of losing his identity and being laughed at if he argued, so he tried hard to suppress the anger in his heart, and said coldly, "I am Wang Yixing, an appraiser from the upper house, and specially came to check your pulse." Originally, the appraisal of the pulse needed to invite an immortal master from the upper house who was at least in the mystic light realm, and then the person being appraised would invite an elder from the clan to be the witness. However, because Zhang Yan was not from an aristocratic family, the appraisers from the upper house relied on their status, and no one was willing to come, so it was delayed again and again. However, the rules of the Yingtsang sect could not be broken, and after more than half a month, they finally sent Wang Yixing, a cultivator in the clear qi realm, to deal with it. This Wang Yixing was also from an aristocratic family in the Shenmen sect, and this task fell on his head, and he felt that he had lost face, but his senior brothers forced him to do it, and he could not refuse. Therefore, his mood was extremely bad, and no matter how he looked at Zhang Yan, he did not like it. "Since it is the appraiser from the upper house, I will naturally take a look with senior brother." Zhang Yan silently circulated his yuanjun, and immediately, there was a cloud-like aura that spread out. Wang Yixing could not help but let out a sound of surprise. Other people needed a moment to see the effect of the pulse, but Zhang Yan showed a strange phenomenon in an instant. This was not simple. However, after he took a look, he said disdainfully, "Fog phase, low grade." He waved his sleeves, cupped his hands, and said, "Goodbye." The three attendants looked at each other. Low grade? They also had discerning eyes, and although Zhang Yan's pulse did not seem to be very good, using a low grade evaluation was too casual. Since the appraisal was over, Zhang Yan did not stay any longer, and immediately said goodbye to the three attendants. Shi Shoujing knew that the pulse was related to Zhang Yan's choice of martial arts in the future. With the appraisal of low grade, it meant that there were very few martial arts that Zhang Yan could choose. He sent Zhang Yan all the way to the door of the main hall, and before leaving, he comforted him, "Junior brother Zhang, in my opinion, although your pulse is low grade, it is complete, and there is endless vitality inside. Even if it is low grade, it is still worthy of the high grade. It will be unfair to you. No matter, it is all low grade. How can there be a difference between high grade and low grade?" Zhang Yan's expression was as usual, and there was not a trace of unhappiness. Shi Shoujing secretly nodded. No matter how good Zhang Yan's aptitude was, his temperament was first class, and in the future, it was not likely that he would not have any achievements, so he said kindly, "Tomorrow, someone will come to pick junior brother up to the upper house. If you have time, you can come to the lower house." "Of course, senior brother, please keep your jade finger. I will take my leave." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and left. Along the way down Haojue Peak, he also let out a long breath. If that Wang Yixing saw some high-grade pulse, he would have to spend a lot of words to explain. Fortunately, that person was not knowledgeable enough, and it was a fake story, so he did not see it. He knew that his identity was too special, and as a non-aristocratic family, he opened his pulse from the lower house and directly entered the upper house. It would definitely attract a lot of attention, and most of them did not have good intentions, so it was quite inconvenient to do things. The water in the upper house was deeper than the water in the lower house, so before he had a clear understanding of the situation, it was not good to be too ostentatious. As for the martial arts that Shi Shoujing mentioned, he did not care at all. Now that he had the Tai Golden Book in hand, when the Qi dynamic was cultivated to a high level, it could be used as money and iron, comparable to magic weapons and flying swords. Even the Du family had to go through many ways to get this book. How could the gift from the sect be better than this? As for those elixirs and instruments that originally belonged to the true disciples, he had no intention of giving them away. He must fight for what should be in his hands. Everyone in the lower house was also waiting to see how Zhang Yan's pulse was. Not long after, the news came. After the evaluation by the master, Zhang Yan's pulse was only of the low-grade mist form. When everyone heard this, they felt a little better. Most of them thought that this was a matter of course. Without the support of a clan, without the gift of a sect, a mere cultivator of ordinary birth, to be able to open his meridians and break through closed-door cultivation was already a blessing from the heavens. How could they expect him to open a passable meridian? But in any case, since Zhang Yan was a disciple of the lower house, it was a foregone conclusion that he would go to the upper house after opening his pulse. It was not that there were no disciples of ordinary birth who entered the lower house before, but those people were all talented, rare geniuses. The aristocratic families usually used the method of marriage to recruit them, but when they heard that Zhang Yan's pulse was of the low grade, the aristocratic families who originally had some interest in him immediately lost interest. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.